This is Jocko Podcast number 85 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
I was given a very old man who could not or would not keep up with his countrymen because he repeatedly fell and then simply lay there. I regularly had to lift him up and drag him forward. Thus, I only reached the execution site when my comrades had already shot their Jews. At the sight of his countrymen who had been shot, my Jew threw himself on the ground and remained lying there. I then cocked my carbine and shot him through the back of the head. Because I was already very upset from the cruel treatment of the Jews during the clearing of the town and was completely in turmoil, I shot too high. The entire back of the skull of my Jew was torn off and the brain exposed. Parts of the skull flew into Sergeant Steinmetz's face. This was grounds for me, after returning to the truck, to go to the first sergeant and ask for my release. I had become so sick that I simply couldn't anymore. I was then relieved by the first sergeant. Systematic murder. That's what we're talking about. This is the Nazis' final solution, which was not always carried out in the relatively detached method often thought of when we think of the Holocaust. Because when we think of the Holocaust, a lot of times we think of this big mechanism. We think of trains. We think of gas chambers. We think of process. We think of a massive bureaucratic machine that is doing the killing. And maybe that in some way is easier for us to understand, and that's why we focus on that piece. It's easier for us to accept that. But it wasn't all like that. Many lives were taken, many murders committed by hand, at close range, point blank. So what kind of monsters committed those atrocities, those personal atrocities, up close and personal murders that covered the murderers in the blood of their victims? What kind of men were those? And how did they end up there? And what can we do to prevent it from occurring again? Now, to answer, or at least try and come to some understanding, we're going to explore a book that is called Ordinary Men. Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the Final Solution in Poland, written by Christopher R. Browning. And that first excerpt that I read is from that book, and it's from a soldier in the police battalion named August Zorn, and that's actually a pseudonym. The names were changed for some of the Nazis in the book. But the book is incredibly detailed in what happened and where these men were from and what unfolded. And obviously this is going to be a graphic episode. And you know, I actually wish I didn't have to talk about this. I do. I really do. I wish I could talk about nicer things. I wish I could talk about pleasant things and we could just forget about all this horror. But there's the rub, because even though it would be easier and more pleasant to talk about something nice, the problem is that if we forget about these things, then we forget about these things. And if we forget, we don't learn. And if we don't learn about what humans can do and why they do what they do, then we can repeat our mistakes, and that is awful. So we go because we have to go. And we go back to the book. Just as the sky was beginning to lighten, the convoy halted outside Józefów. It was a typical Polish village of modest white houses with thatched straw roofs. Among its inhabitants were 1,800 Jews. The village was totally quiet. The men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 climbed down from their trucks and assembled in the half circle around their commander, Major Wilhelm Trapp, a 53-year-old career policeman affectionately known by his men as Papa Trapp. The time had come for Trapp to address the men and inform them of the assignment the battalion had received. Pale and nervous, with choking voice and tears in his eyes, Trapp visibly fought to control himself as he spoke. The battalion, he said plaintively, had to perform a frightfully unpleasant task. This assignment was not to his liking. Indeed, it was highly regrettable, but the orders came from the highest authorities. If it would make the task any easier, the men should remember that in Germany, the bombs were falling on women and children. Then he turned to the matter at hand. The Jews had instigated the American boycott that had damaged Germany, one policeman remembered Trapp saying. There were Jews in the village of Józefów who were involved with the partisans, he explained according to two others. The battalion had now been ordered to round up these Jews. The male Jews of working age were to be separated and taken to a work camp. The remaining Jews, the women, children, and elderly, were to be shot on the spot by the battalion. Having explained what awaited his men, Trapp made them an extraordinary offer. If any of the older men among them did not feel up to the task that lay before them, he could step out. Trapp paused, and after some moments, one man from 3rd Company, Otto Julius Schimke, stepped forward. Captain Hoffman, who had arrived in Józefów directly from Zakharow with 3rd Platoon of 3rd Company and had not been part of the officers' meetings the day before, was furious that one of his men had been the first to break ranks. Hoffman began to berate Schimke, but Trapp cut him off. After he had taken Schimke under his protection, some 10 or 12 other men stepped forward as well. They turned in their rifles and were told to await a further assignment from the major. So, and we'll go into this, but you've got a battalion, 3 companies, there's probably 500 men. And they get this savage order that they're going to go and shoot the women, children, and elderly on the spot in this village with pretty white houses. And the commander, this guy Trapp, who obviously isn't comfortable with it, he's got tears in his eyes when he's given this order. He says, hey, if anybody doesn't want to participate, you can step forward now. And like 10 or 12 people out of 500 step forward. The rest of them hold the line in this case. Going back to the book, Trapp then summoned the company commanders and gave them their respective assignments. The orders were relayed by the platoon commanders. 2 platoons of 3rd Company were to surround the village. The men were explicitly ordered to shoot anyone trying to escape. The remaining men were to round up the Jews and take them to the marketplace. Those too sick or frail to walk to the marketplace, as well as infants and anyone offering resistance or attempting to hide, were to be shot on the spot. Thereafter, a few men of the 1st Company were to escort the work Jews who had been selected at the marketplace, while the rest of 1st Company was to proceed to the forest to form firing squads. The Jews were to be loaded onto battalion trucks by 2nd Company and 3rd Platoon of 3rd Company and shuttled from the marketplace to the forest. And that's for executions.
Yeah.
After making the assignments, Trapp spent most of the day in town, either in a schoolroom converted into his headquarters, at the homes of the Polish mayor and at the local priest at the marketplace, or on the road to the forest. But he did not go to the forest itself or witness the executions. His absence there was conspicuous. As one policeman bitterly commented, Major Trapp was never there. Instead, he remained in Yosifov because he allegedly could not bear the sight. We men were upset about that and said we couldn't bear it either. Indeed, Trapp's distress was a secret to no one. At the marketplace, one policeman remembered hearing Trapp say, "Oh God, why did I have to be given these orders?" as he put his hand on his heart. Another policeman witnessed him at the schoolhouse. Today I can see exactly before my eyes Major Trapp in the room pacing back and forth with his hands behind his back. He made a downcast impression and spoke to me. He said something like, "Man, such jobs don't suit me. But orders are orders." Another man remembered vividly how Trapp, finally alone in our room, sat on a stool and wept bitterly. The tears really flowed. You can hear that idea that orders are orders.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't stand. Doesn't work. Back to the book. As the roundup neared completion, the men of 1st Company were withdrawn from the search and given a quick lesson in the gruesome task that awaited them. They were instructed by the battalion doctor and the company's 1st sergeant. And this is a quote from one of the men. "I believe that at this point all the officers of the battalion were present, especially our battalion physician, Dr. Schoenfelder. He now had to explain to us precisely how we had to shoot in order to induce the immediate death of the victim. I remember exactly that for this demonstration he drew or outlined the contour of a human body, at least from the shoulders upward, and then indicated precisely the point on which the fixed bayonet was to be placed as an aiming guide." So we have the battalion doctor who's instructing some of the men, and you're going to see that it wasn't all of them, to take the bayonet, which is on their rifle, put it on the back of the neck as an aiming guide to know exactly where to shoot. Back to the book. 1st Sergeant Kammer had taken the initial contingent of shooters in 1st Company to a forest several kilometers from Yosifov. The trucks halted on a dirt road that ran along the edge at a point where a pathway led into the woods. The men climbed down from their trucks and waited. When the first truckload of 35 to 40 Jews arrived, an equal number of policemen came forward and, face to face, were paired off with their victims. Led by Kammer, the policemen and Jews marched down the forest path. They turned off into the woods at a point indicated by Captain Wolof, who busied himself throughout the day selecting the execution sites. Kammer then ordered the Jews to lie down in a row. The policemen stepped up behind them, placed their bayonets on the backbone above the shoulder blade as instructed earlier, and on Kammer's command, fired in unison. In the meantime, more policemen of 1st Company had arrived at the edge of the forest to fill out a second firing squad. As the first firing squad marched out of the woods to the unloading point, the second group took their victims along the same path into the woods. Wolhoff chose a site a few yards farther on so the next batch of victims would not see the corpses from the earlier execution. These Jews were again forced to lie face down in a row, and the shooting procedure was repeated. Thereafter, the pendulum traffic of the two firing squads in and out of the woods continued throughout the day. Except for a midday break, the shooting proceeded without interruption until nightfall. At some point in the afternoon, someone organized a supply of alcohol for the shooters. By the end of the day of nearly continuous shooting, the men had completely lost track of how many Jews they had each killed. In the words of one policeman, it was, in any case, a great number. So, clearly, this is not what we think of when we think of the Holocaust. Men being paired off with their victims to take out in the woods and shot in the back of the head. And going through this procedure the entire day. Back to the book. In contrast to 1st Company, the men of 2nd Company received no instruction on how to carry out the shooting. Initially, bayonets were not fixed as an aiming guide, and as Hergert noted, there was a considerable number of missed shots that led to the unnecessary wounding of the victims. One of the policemen in Hergert's unit likewise noted the difficulty the men had in aiming properly. At first, we shot freehand. When one aimed too high, the entire skull exploded. As a consequence, brains and bones flew everywhere. Thus, we were instructed to place the bayonet point on the neck. According to Hergert, however, using fixed bayonets as an aiming guide was no solution. Though the point-blank shot that was thus required, the bullet struck the head of the victim at such a trajectory that often the entire skull, or at least the entire rear skull cap, was torn off, and blood, bone splinters, and brains sprayed everywhere and besmirched the shooters. Hergert was so emphatic that no one in 1st Platoon was given the option of withdrawing beforehand. But once the executions began and men approached either him or Scheer because they could not shoot women and children, they were given other duties. This was confirmed by one of his men. During the execution, word spread that anyone who could not take it any longer could report. He then went on to note, "I myself took part in some 10 shootings in which I had to shoot men and women. I simply could not shoot at people anymore, which became apparent to my sergeant, Hergert, because at the end I repeatedly shot past. For this reason, he relieved me. Other comrades were also relieved sooner or later because they simply could no longer continue." So, obviously, there's mixed emotions about this whole thing, from the top of the chain of command right down to the frontline shooters that are only able to do this so many times. Some of them opt out of it initially. But let's remember that it's still taking place. And no one's stopping it. Some are saying, some people are excusing themselves from it. But there's no one saying, hey, what the hell are we doing right now? Back to the book. Some of the men who hurried at their task shot far more Jews than others who delayed as much as they could. After 2 rounds, one policeman simply slipped off and stayed among the trucks at the edge of the forest. Another managed to avoid taking his turn with the shooters altogether. And here's a quote from him. It was in no way the case that those who did not want to or could not carry out the shooting of human beings with their own hands could not keep themselves out of the task. No strict control was being carried out here. I therefore remained by the arriving trucks and kept myself busy at the arrival point. In any case, I gave my activity such an appearance. It could not be avoided that one or another of my comrades noticed that I was not going to the executions to fire away at the victims. They showered me with remarks such as shithead and weakling to express their disgust. But I suffered no consequences for my actions. I must mention here that I was not the only one who kept himself out of participating in the executions. So, guys, like I said, have figured out that they can not participate if they don't want to. And they're getting called cowards and weaklings by the guys that are actually cowards and weaklings that are going out and executing people. Back to the book. As with First Company, alcohol was made available to the policemen under Drucker and Steinmetz, who stayed in the forest and continued shooting. As darkness approached at the end of a long summer day and the murderous task was still not finished, the shooting became even less organized and more hectic. The forest was so full of dead bodies that it was difficult to find places to make the Jews lie down. So they complete this massacre and they head back to their barracks. And here we go back to the book. When the men arrived back at the barracks, they were depressed, angered, embittered, and shaken. They ate little but drank heavily. Generous quantities of alcohol were provided, and many of the policemen got quite drunk. Major Trapp made the rounds, trying to console and reassure them, and again placing the responsibility on higher authorities. Placing responsibility on higher authorities. You're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. But neither the drink nor Trapp's consolation could wash away the sense of shame and horror that pervaded the barracks. So that was the first police action that they did. This took place in Poland. It was the first time that the group had deployed to Poland. And to give you, when you hear what they did, yeah, you hear some people that had a hard time with it. But still, like I said, that was a small percentage. That was like 10%, maybe 15% of people that said, no, I'm not going to do it, that hid or made themselves busy with other things. Most of the guys just went ahead and did what they were told to do. And you think to yourself, okay, well, who were these guys? Were they hardened combat veterans from the front line? Were they young, sort of brainwashed Nazi youth that's what they believed in, and their mind just saw that as the reality that they had to go through with? And this is the strange thing about this book, is that that's not what it is. That's not who these guys were. And now I'll go to the book to talk about who they actually were. For the most part, Reserve Police Battalion 101 was now composed of men without any experience of German occupation methods in Eastern Europe, or for that matter, with the exception of the very oldest who were World War I veterans, any kind of military service. Most of these guys aren't even from the military. The battalion consisted of 11 officers, 5 administrative officials in charge of financial matters relating to pay and provisioning, lodging, etc., and 486 non-commissioned officers and men. The battalion was divided into 3 companies, each of approximately 140 men when at full strength. 2 companies were commanded by police captains and the third by a senior reserve lieutenant in the battalion. Each company was divided into 3 platoons, 2 of them commanded by reserve lieutenants, and the third by a platoon senior sergeant. So this is kind of a normal military makeup. The battalion was commanded by 53-year-old Major Wilhelm Trapp, World War I veteran and recipient of the Iron Cross First Class. Now we know World War I obviously was a brutal war, and he's a survivor of that, awarded the Iron Cross First Class, fought for Germany, and lost. What did he do after the war? Back to the book. After the war, he became a career policeman and rose through the ranks. He'd recently been promoted from captain of 2nd Company, and this was his 1st battalion command. Though Trapp had joined the Nazi Party in December of 1932 and thus technically qualified as an old party fighter or Alterkampfer, he had never been taken into the SS or even given an equivalent SS rank. In spite of the fact that Himmler and Heydrich consciously tried to merge and intertwine the state and party components of their SS police empire, Trapp was clearly not considered SS material. So, and you're going to see this. These guys, I mean, there's a war going on. So why are these guys in a police battalion as opposed to being on the front lines fighting the war? The reason is because they're not quite the right material to go out and fight. And by the way, this is, we're going to get to a point soon in the war where there's some 14-year-old Hitler Youth going out to fight. But these guys aren't being selected. Back to the book. He was soon to come into conflict with his 2 captains, both young SS men, who even in their testimony more than 20 years later made no attempt to conceal their contempt for their commander as weak, unmilitary, and unduly interfering in the duties of his officers. So he's got a couple police captains that were a little bit more hardcore. Let me tell you about them. Wolfgang Hoffmann, he was born in 1914, 16 years old. He was in Hitler Youth in 1932. At 18, he was in the SS, graduated from Gymnasium, which is a college preparatory high school in 1934, joined the police force in 1936, entered the Nazi Party in 1937. Same year he completed police training, was commissioned as a lieutenant, and now he's in the reserves in 1942, Reserve Police Battalion 101. So he'd come up through the ranks, as a Nazi. But still, even him, I mean, his formative years, he's born in 1914. So, it's not like it's all he knew. He went from 1914 to what, 1933, 1930. So he was 16 years old. He had been formed, lived as a normal German before the Nazi Party was around. We're not talking a brainwashed, complete Nazi youth. Same thing with the other guy born in 1913. This is Julius Wohlhoff. Also graduated from Gymnasium, joined the Nazi Party in 1933. 1936 became SS. So these guys are more, they're more engaged in the whole Nazi party and obviously towing the line along that. Now, so that's the 2 police captains that are in charge of a couple of the companies inside the battalion. Now, let's talk a little bit about the men. The men aged generally from 33 to 48 years old. 5 were party members. None of them belonged to the SS. Back to the book, of the 32 non-commissioned officers on whom we have information, 22 were party members and 7 were in the SS. They ranged in age from 27 to 40 years old. Their average age was 33 and a half. They were not reservists, but rather pre-war recruits to the police. Of the rank and file, so now we're just talking about the troops, the 400 plus troops. Of the rank and file, the vast majority were from the Hamburg area. 63% were working class background, but few were skilled laborers. The majority of them held typical Hamburg working class jobs. Dock workers and truck drivers were most numerous, but there were also many warehouse and construction workers, machine operators, seamen, and waiters. About 35% were lower middle class, virtually all of them white-collar workers. 3/4 of them were in sales of some sort. The other 1/4 formed various office jobs in both government and private sector. The number of independent artisans and small businessmen were very small. Only a handful, 2%, were middle-class professionals, and very modest ones at that, such as druggists and teachers. The average age of the men was 39. Over half were between 37 and 42, a group considered too old for the army, but most heavily conscripted for reserve police duty after September 1939. So these guys, so the men are they're 30, 40 years old. 35, 40 years old. These guys are fully developed, right? They're not
impressionable.
They're not impressionable guys that are just raised inside the Nazi culture. Because I mean, let's face it, if you're raised in any cultish religion scenario, there's a really good chance that that's what you're going to believe in, and you don't understand any other way of thinking. Yeah. So you can, I don't know if you can be excused, but it's understandable how you end up that way.
Yeah.
Back to the book. The men of Reserve Police Battalion were from the lower orders of German society. They had experienced neither social nor geographic mobility by virtue of their age. And here's what we were just talking about. By virtue of their age, of course, all went through their formative period in the pre-Nazi era. These were men who had known political standards and moral norms other than those of the Nazis. Most came from Hamburg, by reputation one of the least Nazified cities in Germany, and the majority came from a social class that had been anti-Nazi in its political culture. These men would not seem to have been a very promising group from which to recruit mass murderers on behalf of Nazi vision of a racial utopia free of Jews. And I think the title of this book is Ordinary Men, and that's why, because that's what we're talking about here. Ordinary men. I mean, that's about a clear cross section of society than you could come up with. I mean, you come up with the same cross section of society in America. A bunch of guys working as construction workers, waiters, truck drivers, dock workers. I mean, that's what people do. Oh, what age are they? They're 35, 40 years old. Okay. Is that the group that you think you're going to be able to take out and get them to murder thousands and thousands of people face to face? Okay. Now, there's a section here. It's the reflections on the massacre itself, and it's talking about this first, like I said, this first thing that took place in Josefov. It was their first big action as a group. So here we go back to the book. At Josefov, a mere dozen men out of nearly 500 responded instinctively to Major Trapp's offer to step forward and excuse themselves from the impending mass murder. Why was the number of men from the beginning declared themselves unwilling to shoot so small? And he kind of offers an explanation here. It's like the suddenness of it. Mm-hmm. And people are kind of surprised. And I can make sense of that, right? Yeah. Like if I gave you time to think, if I was like, hey, Echo, we got to go do this thing right now, you'd probably be like, okay, cool, let's go do it.
Right.
But if I said, hey, Echo, we're going to go do something tomorrow, I'll pick you up at 10:30. Yeah. Let me know. Well, now you have time to contemplate.
Yeah.
So he surprised him with it. There's also, obviously, there was peer pressure, right?
Yes.
To conform. And, that's going to play a role, and we'll talk about that more later. Going back to the book. Nonetheless, the act of stepping out that morning in Josefov meant leaving one's comrades and admitting that one was too weak or cowardly. Who would have dared, one policeman declared emphatically, to lose face before the assembled troops? If the question is posed to me why I shot with the others in the first place, said another who subsequently asked to be excused after several rounds of killing, I must answer that no one wants to be thought a coward. It was one thing to refuse at the beginning, he added, and quite another to try and shoot but not be able to continue. Another policeman, more aware of what truly required courage, said quite simply, I was cowardly. So that person gets it.
Yeah.
These people are, the shooters are saying, hey, I didn't want to be a coward, so I wanted to go shoot.
Right.
When actually to stand up and say, no, that's what would have taken real moral courage at this point. And obviously, these guys knew what they were doing was wrong.
Yeah.
They knew it. That's why some of them weren't able to continue. Now, speaking of cowardly, here's a little section that I thought should be pointed out, and we were talking about this before the podcast, how people rationalize things.
Yeah.
Well, listen to this rationalization. Perhaps the most astounding rationalization of all was that of a 35-year-old metal worker from Bremerhaven. Quote, I made the effort, and it was possible for me to shoot only children. It so happened that the mothers led the children by the hand. My neighbor then shot the mother, and I shot the child that belonged to her, because I reasoned with myself that after all, without its mother, the child could not live any longer. It was supposed to be, so to speak, soothing to my conscience to release the children unable to live without their mothers. And actually, he goes in here and talks about the German word for release also means to like redeem or save. So this guy's really twisted things up in his head. Mm. The dangers of rationalization right there. Good God. Back to the book. With few exceptions, the whole question of anti-Semitism is marked by silence. So this is interesting. This is very interesting. I should have pointed this out earlier, but this book is based on all these different interviews and witness accounts, mostly of the policemen themselves. Now, and again, I should have pointed this out in the beginning. Of course, people are making witness statements, and there's all kinds of problems with those, right? They don't remember things correctly. Yeah. They're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to protect their friends. They're trying to indict certain people and make them look like the bad guy. They might be trying to make themselves look good. So there's all these kind of angles that you have to listen to. You have to understand this with.
Yeah.
But this is interesting. As they interview these guys, back to the book, with few exceptions, the whole question of anti-Semitism is marked by silence. What is clear is that the men's concern for their standing in the eyes of their comrades was not matched by any sense of human ties with their victims. The Jews stood outside their circle of human obligation and responsibility. Such a polarization between us and them, between one's comrades and the enemy, is of course standard in war, and it is indeed. But I guess what surprised me is these guys weren't going in there with thinking to themselves, okay, these are the Jews that are doing us wrong and we're going to get our chance. Right. They were just kind of saying, well, they're not us,
right?
So we'll do what we have to do.
Yeah.
Back to the book. Even 20 or 25 years later, those who did quit shooting along the way overwhelmingly cited sheer physical revulsion against what they were doing as the prime motive, but did not express any ethical or political principles behind this revulsion. So that's interesting. These guys were stopping because it made them feel sick.
Yeah.
And they weren't saying, look, I'm actually... What I've been saying is like, hey, these guys knew it was wrong. Yeah. Well, they didn't think of it as wrong, or at least this is explaining that they weren't thinking, oh, this is so wrong. Right. What they were thinking was, I'm going to be sick. Now, any rational person can figure out that if something makes you sick to do, then you've got some deep-seated knowledge that what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that was like the moral part of it, right or wrong and stuff. That wasn't the primary. The primary was just, I can't take the blood and guts, man.
I can't take the blood and guts. Yeah, you're exactly right. Now, like I said, there's a connection, and I don't think he makes it in the book, but in my mind, there's a connection. If you're doing something that makes you feel sick, it's not just the making you feel sick that should be bothering you. What should be bothering you is the fact that you're doing something that makes you feel sick. There's a reason why it makes you feel sick. There's a reason why human beings feel sick when they're laying down children and shooting in the back of the head. There's a reason for that. That's like a survival instinct, right? For your species to carry on.
Yeah.
You have to make the other members of your species survive.
Yeah. Especially if just like how you said, there wasn't like some enemy kind of feeling towards these people. Like it's not like, oh, we're defending ourselves against this enemy. You know, it wasn't that. It was just that. It was essentially the minimum requirement to go against somebody. They're not us.
Yeah, and he's going to go into this a little bit, but yeah, you're right. It's not like there's. You know, he says, hey, there's women and children being bombed back in Germany right now, but there's no direct correlation. They're not saying, hey, look, these Jews are fighting us. They're gonna take over. They've got ground in on our borders. No, they're not saying that. They're actually in total control of the Jews at this point, or they're not total control, but they're getting really close. Getting really close. Back to the book. The resentment and bitterness in the battalion over what they had been asked to do in Yosefov was shared by virtually everyone, even those who had shot the entire day. The exclamation of one policeman to First Sergeant Kammer of the 1st Company that I'd go crazy if I had to do that again expressed the sentiments of many. But few went beyond complaining to extricate themselves from such a possibility. So they all said, hey, I hope I never have to do that again.
Yeah.
But very few of them actually made a stand. The most dramatic, back to the book, the most dramatic response again was that of Lieutenant Buckman, who asked Trapp to have him transferred back to Hamburg and declared that short of a direct personal order from Trapp, he would not take part in Jewish actions. In the end, he wrote to Hamburg explicitly requesting a recall because he was not suited to certain tasks alien to the police that were being carried out by his unit in Poland. Buckman had to wait until November, but his efforts to be transferred were ultimately successful. So there's a guy that's one guy that they're citing that actually said, dude, I'm not going to do this. Now, it was bad enough and did have a bad enough effect on the men, and they complained about it enough that there was some changes. So here we go back to the book. In subsequent actions, 2 vital changes were introduced henceforth, with some notable exceptions adhered to. First, most of the future operations of the Reserve Police Battalion 101 involved ghetto clearing and deportation, not outright massacre on the spot. The policemen were thus relieved of the immediate horror of the killing process, which for deportees from the northern Lublin district was carried out in the extermination camp at Treblinka. So now we're not going to, you don't have to go shoot them. You just got to gather them up and get them shipped off to the extermination camp. Second, while deportation was a horrifying procedure characterized by the terrible coercive violence needed to drive people onto the death trains, as well as the systematic killing of those who could not be marched to the trains, these actions were generally undertaken jointly by units of Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the Tronikis, SS-trained auxiliaries from the Soviet territories recruited from the Russian POW camps and usually assigned to the very worst parts of the ghetto clearing and deportation. So imagine this group. You get a group of thugs that are from Russian POW camps, and you say, oh yeah, we'll let you out of this POW camp and you can come work for us. And they're trained by the SS. Not exactly a friendly crew of guys. In fact, that's like, I can't imagine a worse group of people to come and come after you.
Yeah.
Back to the book. The bulk of the killing was to be removed to the extermination camp, and the worst of the on-the-spot dirty work was to be assigned to the Tronikis. This change would prove sufficient to allow the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 to become accustomed to their participation in the final solution. When the time came to kill again, the policemen did not go crazy. Instead, they became increasingly efficient and calloused executioners. So, a couple changes. It was a little too much for them to actually do all the killing themselves. Now they got some people to help them out, and or they are just going to gather them up and ship them away. And now they're only playing a little piece in the machine.
Yeah.
Right? Just a little piece in the machine. So it's a lot easier to detach from what's actually happening. Back to the book, the Jews of Lomazi were to be the target of Reserve Battalion 101's first joint killing action with a unit from the Traniki. Second company was to provide the bulk of the manpower for the roundup. The primary function of the Traniki unit was to provide the shooters, thus alleviating the chief psychological burden the German policemen had experienced at Yosefov. And here the orders come out. They're going in, and now there's another term that comes up. It has to do with the Traniki, but it's Hiwis, and it's short. I forget what the German words are, but Hiwis is short for two big German words. One of them that means willing, and one of them that means helper. So they called these sort of people that had come to the German side, and they called them Hiwis. And it's like I said, it stands for willing helper. It's like using. You ever heard the term spec war? That stands for special warfare. Yeah. This is the same thing with two German words that mean willing helper. So here we go back to the book. The NCOs were told that the Hiwis from Traniki would do the shooting. So the policemen would, for the most part, be spared. Nonetheless, the roundup was to be conducted as had been done before, which is to say that infants and the old, sick, and frail who could not be easily taken to the assembly point were to be shot on the spot. So not out of all the killing. According to one squad leader, however, most children were once again brought to the assembly point. As in Yosefov, the men encountered not only German Jews, but specifically Hamburg Jews during the clearing action. The Jews quickly filled the schoolyard and overflowed into the adjoining sports field. With some shooting, the roundup was finished in 2 short hours. So that's a real sort of one sentence. And if you can just try and imagine what the hell is going on there, these soldiers, these Russian soldiers, these German soldiers are coming in and rounding people up. They're using violence, shooting people to get all the Jews into the schoolyard. This is a nightmare scenario that he puts in a sentence here. Back to the book. The 1,700 Jews of Lumazi were then forced to sit and wait. A group of 60 to 70 young men were selected out, given shovels and spades, loaded onto trucks, and driven to the woods. Several of the young Jews jumped from the moving trucks and made good their escape. Another attacked a German corporal, the battalion boxing champion, who promptly knocked his desperate assailant senseless. In the woods, the Jews were set to digging a mass grave. Back in Lomazi, the wait of the doomed Jews and their police guards stretched into hours. Suddenly, a contingent of 50 Hiwis from Traniki marched into town, led by a German SS officer. I can still remember it exactly, one policeman testified, that immediately after the arrival of these Tranikis took a break. After their arrival, the Tranikis took a break. I saw that in addition to food, they also took out bottles of vodka out of their packs and drank from them. The SS officer and Gnad, this is a guy that arrived on the scene now, Gnade, began drinking heavily as well. The other NCOs smelled of alcohol, but unlike the two commanders, were not visibly drunk. So these guys are drinking vodka, and they know what they're about to have to go do. Now we're talking about this guy, Lieutenant Gnade. Lieutenant Gnade was a Nazi by conviction and an anti-Semite. He was also unpredictable, affable, and approachable at times, brutal and vicious at others. And here's an eyewitness account from one of the soldiers. Back to the book. Even before the shooting began, First Lieutenant Nade had personally picked out some 20 to 25 elderly Jews. They were exclusively men with full beards. Nade made the old men crawl on the ground in the area before the grave. Before he gave them the order to crawl, they had to undress. While the totally naked Jews crawled, First Lieutenant Nade screamed to those around, "Where are my non-commissioned officers? Don't you have any clubs yet?" The non-commissioned officers went to the edge of the forest, fetched themselves clubs, and vigorously beat the Jews with them. They get the mass grave dug. And here we go. Immediately, large numbers of Jews were driven into the grave, and the Hiwis took their position on the walls that had been thrown up. From there, they shot the victims. As the shooting continued, the grave began to fill. The Jews who followed had to climb on and later even clamber over those shot earlier because the grave was filled with corpses almost to the edge. The NCOs decided that the execution should continue with 2 firing squads on opposite sides of the grave. The Jews were forced to lie down in rows alongside each side of the grave, and were shot by the police standing on the opposite wall. Men from all 3 platoons were formed into squads of 8 to 10 and were relieved by others in a rotation after 5 or 6 shots. After about 2 hours, the Hiwis were roused from their stupor and resumed shooting in place of the German policemen. The shooting was finished around 7 p.m., and the work Jews who had been kept aside covered the grave. The work Jews were then shot as well. The thin covering of the overfill grave continued to move. So you got people that are not dead, that are now buried alive. And there was a part that I didn't cover. Basically, the Hiwis got too drunk to continue on, and the police had to go and take their place for a while, and then they kind of recovered. But this is the situation that we're talking about. Just a complete nightmare. Back to the book. One other factor sharply distinguished Lomazi from Yosifov and may well have been yet another kind of psychological relief for the men, namely, and this is important from a psychological and from a leadership perspective. So I'm going back to it again. One other factor may sharply distinguish Lomazi from Yosifov and may well have been yet another kind of psychological relief for the men. Namely, this time they did not bear the burden of choice that Trapp had offered them so starkly on the occasion of the first massacre. No chance to step out was given to those who did not feel up to the shooting. No one systematically excused those who were visibly too shaken to continue. Everyone assigned to the firing squads took his turn as ordered. Therefore, those who shot did not have to live with clear awareness that what they had done had been unavoidable. So that's a big difference. Yeah. The big difference. And from a leadership perspective, that's something that I've actually talked about this before. It's interesting. When we were in Ramadi, we, Task Unit Bruiser, we kind of decided what we were going to do, right? We weren't getting told, go do this. And so everything that we did because we decided that we could mitigate the risk, and it was a good operation, and it was an area that we could do a good job in, so we had a lot of control over our fate. And that's actually can be psychologically heavier, because if something goes wrong, it's all on you as the leader. Yeah. or as the leadership team, or even as the guys that are on the front, the point man's selecting his own, going down to the front line troops, the point man is selecting the route. If he hits an IED, sure, it's the enemy's fault, but he's thinking to himself, why did I choose that route?
Yeah.
Now the Army, they did have some control, but they had more often than not, they'd be getting told, hey, you're going to go on a patrol down this road, or hey, you're going to go hit this building. So they were relieved oftentimes of that freedom of choice.
Yeah.
So the freedom of choice can be a little bit of a burden. And so what happened here was the freedom of choice was taken away.
Yeah.
And that burden was therefore taken away. Look, you're going to shut up and do this.
Yeah.
Guys, okay.
Yeah, because you have if you have that choice, back to the part where the 12 guys stepped out, right? And yeah, we can look at it as the guys who stepped out have more courage because they're not essentially. There's two things to be kind of scared of or have courage against, right? One is, okay, I'm not scared to kill these people. I'm scared to pull the trigger, And then there's, I'm not scared to go against the norms.
Yeah.
Which is a bigger kind of thing.
Oh, much harder.
Yeah. So and you have the choice. Which one are you gonna do? If they give you the choice, okay, you can step out if you want. What are you gonna do? And everyone's looking at you like, okay, are you gonna?
I wonder what the tipping point would have been. In other words,
if you chose to do it. Or
if 10 people, but then what if it was 30?
Yeah.
What if it was 40?
Yeah.
You see that at any time in a crowd.
Yeah.
You've seen that stupid video where there's one guy, he's dancing by himself. And it's like some viral video.
Is it kind of old school?
I don't know, but it's a stupid viral video. You don't have to go and watch it yourself, but I'll explain what happens. There's a guy, they're like some kind of a concert, some kind of a outdoor concert. There's a guy dancing by himself.
Yeah.
He's dancing by himself for a long time. And that's why I saw it. But somebody was talking about group, or they used this as an example of group psychology. The guy's dancing by himself for a long time. And what they're actually saying is that the person that has the courage is actually the second person that joins him. So anyways, the one person's dancing, he's dancing by himself for several minutes.
Yeah.
Then another person joins him. Once the other person joins him, then all of a sudden 5 people, and then it's 20 people, and then the next thing you know, everyone is dancing.
Yeah. And
I wonder what the tipping point would have been here.
Yeah.
You get 10 people out of 500, that wasn't enough.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But what if all of a sudden 15, 20, 30, 40 people would have stepped forward? Yeah. Then all of a sudden everyone says, hey, we're not doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I wonder if they knew for sure that there wasn't going to, because some guys were getting called names.
Well, yeah, and I think it was the suddenness that he talked about in the book.
Yeah.
If you would have said, okay, listen, tomorrow, we're going to go out and kill a bunch of women and children point blank range in the woods.
Yeah.
You're going to have to shoot them all.
Yeah, let me know if you're down.
Yeah, and then if you would have done that, but then given them hours to sit there and think about it.
Yeah, and then the next guy's like, hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Then it may have spread.
Yeah.
But that peer pressure was hardcore.
That's what I mean,
It was
man.
hardcore.
So it's especially, like I said, if they're scared of the authority, it's like, okay, the tipping point's going to be more, for sure. But you do something like, your example, or you ever see, you see this all the time where you say something, you're on stage, you say something kind of cool, not, it's not the end of your presentation, you say something kind of cool, and then one guy starts clapping, and then everyone starts clapping,
right, right.
It's kind of that thing where there's no consequence to clapping, so it's like, all right, oh shoot, that's what we're doing, okay, I'll clap, I feel good about clapping, I'm going to do it, kind of thing. There's no real resistance, so the tipping point is going to be one guy, that's the tipping point, but you get something where there might be some resistance, some risk, of pain, or, whatever kind of punishment. Yeah, the tipping point's going to be more, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder what that is, man, because it's not like the Nazi regime was very understanding.
No. I mean, pretty much you can say that most military units aren't very understanding. There's going to be a certain level of
rigidity,
there's discipline in place for a reason.
Yeah.
And you can get away. I talk about all the time, I say, look, you can't just order people to do things. It only lasts for so long.
Yeah.
But how long did it need to last here? It only needed to last a night. If you can get everyone to do what you need them to do tonight, okay. We got through our mission. And now I'll let them, what did he do? he actually let him go get drunk and talk to him and built up some more leadership capital because he expended it.
Yeah.
He expended a bunch of his leadership capital to get this mission done, and now he's got to rebuild it and develop his relationship again with the guys and bring in some other changes. Hey, look, we're not going to do all the killing this time, so yeah.
Man, it's crazy. I thought it was pretty surprising, and I feel kind of psycho saying refreshing to know that they didn't get that much punishment aside from some name calling, Because you don't think of it like that, I think, when you think of all this in it. If the guy chose not to kill people, they got
all they got was name called.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that they probably that might have changed the tipping point.
Yeah, when they realized.
Those guys that step forward, they might have thought they get put in the ditch because there's some, and I didn't cover this part, but there's definitely some parts where guys like, hey, we'll put you in the ditch.
That's
you
actually
need to get
what
up
I
here
thought.
and do your job.
Yeah.
But I think that reveals the discomfort of the overall situation.
Yeah,
they weren't looking at their buddy saying, no, I'm going to kill you now. They were like, hey, actually, I kind of agree with you, but you just stay over there and we'll go forward.
No, bro.
Okay, so the next situation that they get into are these deportations to Treblinka, the death camp. And here we go, back to the book. While the policemen did not know precisely where the Jews were being sent or what was being done with them, it was all clear and well known to all of us, as Heinrich Steinmetz admitted, that for the Jews affected, these deportations meant the path to death. We suspected that they would be killed in some sort of camp. Spared direct participation in the killing, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 seem scarcely to have been disturbed by this awareness. Even though there were more victims in the deportations than in Yosefo or Lomaze massacres combined, out of sight was truly out of mind. So now they're in this mode of they're just doing the deportations. Now I say just doing the deportations, and I don't want to make that sound like it wasn't a brutal, vicious exercise that they were doing. Here we go, back to the book. Driven by the Hiwis and policemen, thousands of Jews streamed into the marketplace. Here they had to sit or squat without moving or getting up. As the hours passed on this very hot August of the late summer heat wave, many Jews fainted and collapsed. Moreover, beating and shooting continued in the marketplace. And I don't know if I quoted this in here or if I'll get to it, but these guys, they're shooting people. They also bring out whips. So they're whipping people. It's brutal. Back to the book. One final horror was reserved to the end, for the train cars now had to be loaded. While the Hiwis and security police packed 120 to 140 Jews into each car, the reserve policemen stood guard and observed. As one remembered, when it didn't go well, they made use of riding whips and guns. The loading was simply frightful. There was an unearthly cry from these poor people because 10 or 20 cars were being loaded simultaneously. The entire freight train was dreadfully long. One could not see all of it. It may have been 50 to 60 cars, if not more, and after a car was loaded, the doors were closed and nailed shut. Once all the cars were sealed, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 quickly departed without waiting to see the train pull away. These guys did their little part of the job, and they're going to walk away now. But yeah, it's a nightmare scenario. Continuing on, shortly before the deportation program resumed in Northern Security Zone, Reserve Police Battalion 101 was involved in several more mass shootings. So there's a couple times that they don't get the help that they had before. Going back to the book, without the experienced help of the Hiwis, Wolhoff organized the executions along the lines of the Yosefov shooting. The groups of 20 to 30 Jews, which had been marched out of town in succession to gravel pits, were turned over to an equal number of Peters and Urich's commandos. Thus, each policeman once again faced the individual Jew he was going to shoot. The Jews were not forced to undress, nor was there a collection of valuables. There was also no selection for labor. All the Jews, regardless of age and sex, were to be shot. So then, in the earlier ones, they were stripping them down and collecting their valuables. They're not even doing that. And I bet they're not doing that because when you do that, you're getting some kind of an interaction. You're seeing their personal items, and they don't want any of that. Just take them out and shoot them. The easiest psychological way to do it. Back to the book. The policemen and the shooting commandos marched their Jews to the crest of one of the mounds of waste material in the area of the gravel pits. The victims were lined up facing a 6-foot drop. From a short distance behind, the policemen fired on order into the necks of the Jews. The bodies tumbled over the edge. Following each round, the next group of Jews was brought up to the same spot and thus had to look down at the growing pile of corpses of their family and friends before they were shot in turn. Only after a number of rounds did the shooters change sights. Here's some more deportation operations. They're back to doing deportations, back to the book, but even the most unfettered violence could not overcome the shortage of train cars. And when the doors were finally forced shut, about 150 Jews, mostly women and children, but also some men, remained. Nade, this is that same lieutenant sadist, summoned Drucker and told him to take these Jews to the cemetery. At the cemetery entrance, the policeman chased away the eager spectators and waited until First Sergeant Ostman arrived in a truck with a supply of vodka for the shooters. Ostman turned to one of his men who had hitherto avoided shooting and chided him. "Drink up now, Pfeiffer. You're in for it this time because the Jewesses must be shot. You've gotten yourself out of it so far, but now you must go to it." An execution squad of about 20 men was sent into the cemetery. The Jews were brought in groups of 20, men first, and then women and children. They were first to lie down near the cemetery wall and then shot from behind the neck. Each policeman fired 7 or 8 times. At the cemetery gate, one Jew sprang at Drucker with a syringe but was quickly subdued. The other Jews sat quietly, awaiting their fate, even after the shooting began. They were quite emaciated and looked half-starved to death, one guard remembered. It's covered in here, not in the kind of detail we should cover it, but these Jews that were now getting rounded up, they were already in in some of the cases in the book, they were already in these ghettos, Jewish ghettos. Like, they'd been forced into these ghettos. They're now just living there, starving, but they're living. And then the Germans no more Jews. They wanted the areas, I think the word was Judenfree, was like free of Jews. So now even these people, and by the way, there were some of the Germans that complained, like, hey, those are my laborers. You can't kill my laborers. No, we're killing everyone. So even, again, it's not like this is an enemy with a threat. Yeah. These people were now completely subdued, living in these, I don't call them ghettos. They're like prison ghettos. Yeah. They're living in there. They have no threat to anybody. But they round them up, take them out, and kill them. Yeah. Now, one of the interesting points that they bring up in the book, and I want to cover the whole thing, but it's worth mentioning, is that this guy Hoffman, one of the captains, he has this strange stomach illness. Like, he gets upset to his stomach. So here we go. He misses some of the actions, or at least he's not there present where the executions are taking place and whatnot. And it just painted a picture of the kind of leader that he is. So going back to the book, uniformly, Hoffman's men offered a different perspective, meaning it's not just like, he's sick to his stomach and blah, blah, blah. By their observation, his alleged bouts of stomach cramps, confining him safely to bed, coincided all too consistently with company actions that might involve either unpleasantness or danger. It became common for the men to predict upon hearing the night before a pending action that the company chief would be bedridden in the morning. Hoffman's behavior rankled his men even more because of two aggravating factors. First, he'd always been strict and unapproachable, a typical base officer who liked his white collar and gloves, wore his SS insignia on his uniform, and demanded considerable deference. So that's one thing you heard about the guy. This just paints the worst picture of just such a horrible human being. He loves wearing his rank. He loves being the guy, a base officer. Now there's a term for that they have, I think we made up not we, but the U.S. current war fighting soldiers and Marines. It's a FOBIT. A FOBIT. So you get something called a forward operating base overseas, right. and the forward operating bases can actually be, they're pretty nice. They're relatively secure, and so the FOBIT, right, is the leader that just wants to stay on the FOB. Doesn't want to go out. So this guy's, but of course the FOBITs are always running around, wanting to be respected, demanding respect, demanding deference. So this guy's a FOBIT. The other thing is, and this is very typical of this kind of wretched human. Back to the book. Second, Hoffman tried to compensate for his immobility by intensified supervision of his subordinates. So he's not around, but he's going to be more of a jerk and impose himself more onto the men. Now they're continuing with another ghetto that had to be cleared. Back to the book. By October, the order was for real. Placards announced that all Jews who did not go to the ghettos would be shot. The shooting order was made part of regular company instructions to the men and given repeatedly, especially before they were sent on patrol. No one could be left in any doubt that not a single Jew was to remain alive in the battalion's security zone. In official jargon, the battalion made forest patrols for suspects. As the surviving Jews were to be tracked down and shot like animals, however, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 unofficially dubbed this phase of the final solution the Jew Hunt. The Jew Hunt took many forms. Most spectacular were two battalion sweeps. And here's some George Leffler of 3rd Company talking about that, what those sweeps were like. Back to the book. We were told that there were many Jews hiding in the forest. We therefore searched through the woods in a skirmish line, but we could find nothing because the Jews were obviously well hidden. We combed the woods a second time. Only then could we discover individual chimney pipes sticking out of the earth. We discovered that Jews had hidden themselves in underground bunkers here. They were hauled out with some resistance in only one bunker. Some of the comrades climbed down into this bunker and hauled the Jews out. The Jews were then shot on the spot. The Jews had to lie face down on the ground and were killed by a neck shot. Who was in the firing squad, I don't remember. I think it was simply a case where the men standing nearby were ordered to shoot them. Some 50 Jews were shot, including men and women of all ages, because entire families had hidden themselves there. The shooting took place quite publicly. No cordon was formed at all, for a number of Poles from Parswu were standing directly by the shooting site. They were then ordered, presumably by Hoffman, to bury the Jews who had been shot in a half-finished bunker. So, again, you got some of the Jews had been consolidated in these ghettos, and now they're any Jew that's not in the ghetto, they're out hunting them. Here's another version of it. In cases where the farmyard and the Jewish lodgings could be reached quickly, I drove into the farmyard at high speed, and the police sprang out and immediately rushed to the Jewish lodgings. Then all the Jews present at the time were driven out and shot in the farmyard, near a haystack, potato pit, or dung heap. The victims were almost always naked and were shot in the neck while lying on the ground. Now, even as this was taking place, there's still people that are trying to avoid the shooting. Back to the book, the tactic of keeping one's distance was invoked by Heinrich Voigt to explain how he avoided shooting on all but one occasion. One always had a certain freedom of movement of a few meters, and from experience, I noticed very quickly that the platoon leader almost always chose the people standing next to him. I thus always attempted to take position as far as possible from the center of events. Others likewise sought to avoid shooting by staying in the background. So there's still guys that are not they're doing their best not to participate. Again, are they doing anything to stop it? No. Mm-hmm. But this was a great kind of a wrap on the Jew hunt and what this was like. Back to the book. The Jew hunt was not a brief episode. It was a tenacious, remorseless, ongoing campaign in which the hunters tracked down and killed their prey in direct and personal confrontation. It was not a passing phase, but an existential condition of constant readiness and intention to kill every last Jew who could be found. Now we're going to cover this last massacre that took place, and Jews had been sent from to a prison camp to be executed, and they were rounded up. I think it was a place called Leibig, and they were sent to be executed. And the police battalion is now acting as kind of guards and accessories to this, to make sure that the executions, these mass executions, take place correctly. Going back to the book, as the Jews passed between the chain of reserve policemen into the camp, music blared from two loudspeaker trucks. Despite the attempt to drown out other noise, the sound of steady gunfire could be heard from the camp. The Jews were taken to the last row of barracks, where they undressed. Arms raised, hands clasped behind their necks, totally naked, they were led in groups from the barracks through a hole cut in the fence to the trenches that had been dug behind the camp. This route was guarded by men from the Reserve Police Battalion 101. Stationed only 10 meters from the graves, Heinrich Bockholt of 1st Company witnessed the killing procedure. Quote, "From my position, I could now observe how the Jews were driven naked from the barracks by other members of our battalion. The shooters of the execution commandos, who sat on the edge of the graves directly in front of me, were members of the SD." And the SD is like the SS intelligence group, the SD. Some distance behind each shooter stood several other SD men who constantly kept the magazines of the submachine guns filled and handed them to each shooter. A number of shooters were assigned to each grave. Today I can no longer provide details about the number of graves. It is possible that there were many such graves where shooting took place simultaneously. I definitely remember that the naked Jews were driven directly into the graves and forced to lie down quite precisely on top of those who had been shot before them. The shooter then fired off a burst at these prone victims. How long the action lasted, I can no longer say with certainty. Presumably, it lasted the entire day, because I remember that I was relieved once from my post. I can give no details about the number of victims, but there were an awful lot of them. It's almost incomprehensible to imagine that you're one of these Jews getting forced, you're naked, lay down, go into this pit, lay down on top of those other people that were just shot so you can be shot too. Another witness, Martin Detmold, quote, because I was a group leader and could move about more freely, I went once directly to the execution site and saw how the newly arriving Jews had to lie down on those already shot. They were then likewise shot with bursts from submachine guns. The SD men took care that the Jews were shot in such a way that there were inclines in the piles of corpses, enabling the newcomers to lie down on the corpses piled as much as 3 meters high. The whole business was the most gruesome I have ever seen in my life, because I was frequently able to see that after a burst had been fired, the Jews were only wounded, and those still living were more or less buried alive beneath the corpses of those shot later, without the wounded being given so-called mercy shots. I remember that from out of the pile of corpses, the SS men were cursed by the wounded. And that was sort of the final participation of 101 Battalion. And here we get to how it kind of wrapped up. At the conclusion of the Ernstfest massacres, the district of Lublin was, for all practical purposes, Juden-free, free of Jews. The murderous participation of Reserve Police Battalion 101 in the final solution came to an end. With a conservative estimate of 6,500 Jews shot during earlier actions like those at Yosefov and Lomazi, and 1,000 shot during the Jew hunts, and a minimum estimate of 30,500 Jews shot at Majdanek and Ponitois, the battalion had participated in the direct shooting deaths of at least 38,000 Jews. With the death camp deportation of at least 3,000 Jews from Eitzerek in early May 1943, the number of Jews they had placed on trains to Treblinka had risen to 45,000. For a battalion of less than 500 men, the ultimate body count was at least 83,000 Jews. Unbelievable. And here he asks the question, back to the book, why did most men in Reserve Police Battalion 101 become killers while only a minority of perhaps 10% and certainly no more than 20% did not? A number of explanations have been invoked in the past to explain such behavior: wartime brutalization, racism, segmentation and routinization of the task, special selection of the perpetrators, careerism, obedience to orders, deference to authority, ideological indoctrination, and conformity. These factors are applicable in varying degrees, but none without qualification. So he's trying to now figure out why these people did what they did. And that's a list of all the kind of excuses or reasons, I should say, of why these men behave this way. Talks a little bit about overall kind of war crimes here. Back to the book. Many of the most notorious wartime atrocities, the Japanese rampage through Manila, the American slaughter of prisoners and mutilation of corpses on many of the Pacific Islands, and the massacre at My Lai, involved a kind of battlefield frenzy. Soldiers who were inured to violence, numb to the taking of human life, embittered over their own casualties, and frustrated by the tenacity of an insidious and seemingly inhuman enemy, sometimes exploded and at other times grimly resolved to have their revenge at first opportunity. So That's one type. For me, what's that called when you like a non-premeditated murder?
Yeah.
Right? Like just, the guy comes home and his wife's with some other guy and boom, he goes battlefield frenzy.
Yeah.
That's one kind. Now we talk about this premeditated. Back to the book. Other kinds of atrocity, lacking the immediacy of the battlefield frenzy and fully expressing official government policy, decidedly were standard operating procedures. The firebombing of German and Japanese cities, the enslavement and murderous maltreatment of foreign laborers in German camps and factories or along the Siam-Burma Railroad. The reprisal shooting of 100 civilians for every German soldier killed by partisan attack in Yugoslavia or elsewhere in Eastern Europe. These were not the spontaneous explosions or cruel revenge of brutalized men, but the methodical executed policies of government. Both kinds of atrocities occur in the brutalizing context of war, but the men who carry out atrocity by policy are in a different state of mind. They act not out of frenzy, bitterness, and frustration, but with calculation. Clearly, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, in implementing the systematic Nazi policy of exterminating European Jewry, belong in the second category. Except for a few of the oldest men who were veterans of World War I and a few NCOs who had been transferred from Poland from Russia, the men of the battalion had not seen battle or encountered a deadly enemy. Most of them had not fired a shot in anger or even been fired upon, much less lost comrades in fighting at their side. Thus, wartime brutalization through prior combat was not an immediate experience directly influencing the policeman's behavior at Yosifov. Once the killing began, however, the men became increasingly brutalized. As in combat, the horrors of the initial encounter eventually became routine, and the killing became progressively easier. In this sense, brutalization was not the cause, but the effect of the men's behavior. So he's kind of saying, look, like what you said, these guys aren't fighting an enemy. They hadn't lost their buddy. They're not they're not avenging their buddy that got killed next to them, blown up by an IED, and now they're going to take it out on this group that they capture. It's not like that. Back to the book. As John Dower has observed, the dehumanization of the other contributed immeasurably to the psychological distancing that facilitated killing. Distancing, not frenzy and brutalization, is one of the keys to the behavior of the Reserve Police Battalion 101. War and negative racial stereotyping were two mutually reinforcing factors in this distancing. So, in order to kill these people, you got to distance yourself from them. You can't see them as human. You can't see them as people. Many scholars of the Holocaust, especially Raoul Hilberg, have emphasized the bureaucratic and administrative aspects of the destruction process. This is very interesting. This approach emphasizes the degree to which modern bureaucratic life fosters a functional and physical distancing in the same way that war and negative racial stereotype promote a psychological distancing between perpetrator and victim. So you form this bureaucratic machine that you're only a little piece of it. All you're doing is collecting people. All you're doing is putting them in trains. You're not killing anybody.
Yeah.
All you're doing is rounding them up. All you're doing is guarding them as they're getting pushed down into the graves. That's not you.
Yeah.
It's a big bureaucratic machine. You're just a little piece of it. Back to the book. Indeed, many of the perpetrators of the Holocaust were so-called desk murderers, whose role in the mass extermination was greatly facilitated by the bureaucratic nature of their participation. Their jobs frequently consisted of tiny steps in the overall killing process, and they performed them in routine manner, never seeing the victims their actions affected. Segmented, routinized, and depersonalized, the job of the bureaucrat or specialist, whether it involved confiscating property, scheduling trains, drafting legislation, sending telegrams, or compiling lists, could be performed without confronting the reality of mass murder. Such a luxury, of course, was not enjoyed by the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, who were quite literally saturated in the blood of victims shot at point-blank range. No one confronted the reality of mass murder more directly than the men in the woods of Yosifov. Segmentation and routinization, the depersonalizing aspects of the bureaucraticized killing cannot explain the battalion's initial behavior there. So again, he's saying, look, that makes sense. You turn this into a big bureaucratic thing, but that's not what happened here with these guys. The facilitating psychological effect of a division of labor for the killing process was not totally negligible, however. So then he talks about the fact that they did make those adjustments and take the killing out of their hands somewhat. And that did make it easier for them. Now, he talks about, one of the things that he mentioned early on and why this happened, he talks about special selection of the right people. Well, that doesn't really hold true either, because here we go. Back to the book. The case for special selection of officers is even more difficult to make. By SS standards, Major Trapp was a patriotic German, but traditionally and overly sentimental. What in Nazi Germany was scornfully considered both weak and reactionary. So you can't say it was the selection of people, and we already talked about all the different types of normal people that were doing this. They didn't pull some truck driver in Hamburg out and said that's 38 years old and say this guy's going to be the perfect. No, they didn't do that. Back to the book. Reserve Police Battalion was not sent to Lublin to murder Jews because it was composed of men specifically selected or deemed particularly suited for the task. On the contrary, the battalion was the dregs of the manpower pool available at that stage of war. It was employed to kill Jews because it was the only kind of unit available for such behind-the-line duties. Many studies of Nazi killers suggested a different kind of selection, namely self-selection to the party and the SS by unusually violence-prone people. Shortly after the war, Theodor Adorno and many others developed the notion that there's an authoritarian personality. So they started looking at there's certain people that are susceptible to having this type of personality. They made up something called the F scale, which is like your propensity to have a authoritarian personality. Here's some of the ingredients there. Back to the book. Rigid adherence to conventional values, submissiveness to authority figures, aggressiveness toward outgroups, opposition to introspection, reflection, and creativity, a tendency to superstition and stereotyping, preoccupation with power and toughness, destructiveness and cynicism. So these are the kind of things that they're saying that these types of personalities would become Nazis because that's the type of personality they have. There's another, kind of to make this as simple as possible, a guy named Zygmunt Bauman has summed up this approach as follows. Nazism was cruel because Nazis were cruel, and the Nazis were cruel because cruel people tended to become Nazis. Again, these are theories. I don't think you can apply that to a truck driver from Hamburg that got drafted. They didn't even self-select for. They got drafted. They got told, okay, you need to be in the army here, or in the police battalion.
It's almost like it's not necessarily, a person being a truck driver is like, this exclusionary occupation. It's more like just because they're a truck driver, it just doesn't mean anything. It's like that's not the factor. The factor is something else.
Anything when they talked about all these people from Hamburg, anything that they talk about, none of those. It's not like we got a bunch of guys that were that worked in a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
Like we're going to recruit all these people from a slaughterhouse. No, we didn't recruit hunters. We didn't. Yeah. They didn't recruit football players because they're aggressive. No, it was just random any job, and they showed up there. So, basically what I'm getting out of this is he's saying like, no, it's like you can't really say it's that either,
right?
Because it's just a waiter and a salesperson.
But at the same time, the guy who's a waiter could have these other qualities, like how you're talking.
Yeah, but you take 500 people from Hamburg between the ages of 35 and 40, you're not going to find that like all these guys had those kind of fascist qualities about them. Right. Not happening.
Yeah, man. It's crazy.
some people become, this is Ervin Staub accepts the notion that some people become perpetrators as a result of their personality. They are self-selected. And he says that under particular circumstances, most people have a capacity for extreme violence and the destruction of human life. It's an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Under certain circumstances, everyone has a propensity for violence. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's people that would argue that in all different directions. But, you take a middle-aged woman that's never been in a fist fight before, and you have somebody attack her child that's going to kill or harm their child, I think you can see a propensity for violence, and from a lot of them.
Yeah.
Maybe even a very, 99%?
Sure.
I'm going to say 99%.
I'll go with that too, yeah.
Yeah, 99%. If it's a middle-aged woman who has someone that's about to severely hurt or kill their child, and their way to stop it is with a pistol.
Right.
My assessment is we're going to 99% of that perpetrator's getting killed.
Yeah, like with specific effort towards like the violent part of it. You know how like I'm not saying on a movie necessarily, but that old thing. Well, let's say imagine a scenario like that where the lady's gonna shoot this guy because the guy's attacking the kid or something. It won't be like, oh, let me do the bare minimum force, to eliminate the threat. She's probably gonna be she'll go overboard killing that guy.
Gonna kill him extra.
Yeah, because that's kind of the violence coming out of someone. It's one thing to do it because I'm scared and oh my gosh, get away from me kind of thing. That's not violence.
Yeah.
So that's really the question when you consider a middle-aged girl, having a propensity for violence.
I don't think she's going to do extra. I think she's going to kill him and go grab her kid and make sure her kid's safe.
Right.
I don't see this extra level, desecration of the body or anything like that. I just hey, I'm going to make my kid safe.
Yeah, so you're saying the propensity for violence in that case is just the mere act of killing the guy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But I'm thinking of a movie for whatever reason.
Because that's all your brain is filled with.
But or television in general. But the girl, she's like scared. It's all done out of fear, And sure, it's almost like the violence is just happenstance. It's not her propensity for violence necessarily, but it's just the violence.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if you set up an experiment.
Yes.
Where you took a middle-aged group of women, and they had children, and you put them in a scenario where, it was either the kid dies or they kill the perpetrator.
Right.
Not like I might be able to debate him out of it. No, the axe is in the air. It's going to be swung down on the kid.
Right.
You have to press this button to kill that guy.
Yeah, where violence is the choice.
Violence is the choice.
Yeah.
I think the propensity is going to be 99, and I'm going to go even higher.
Agree.
So then he gets into some of these real famous experiments, kind of sociological experiments. One of them is the Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. I'm sure you've heard of that. Everyone's heard of that, where they basically take people and divide them up and just randomly. And actually, I didn't know this because I never did any deep research on the study, but they kind of do a pre-screening to make sure that there's no extreme personalities. Mm-hmm. Everyone that was like, however you could frame the word normal. Mm-hmm. The people that participate in the experiment are just like normal people. They didn't have any extreme personalities.
Right.
Well, those kind of semi-normal people, they put them in that prison experiment, and sure enough, some people were made guards, some people were made prisoners, and they had to get them to do certain things, and there's a certain number. I mean, it didn't take long for the guards. I think it took 6 days. Some of the guards turned sadistic, evil, right? And here we go back to the book. Most dramatic and distressing to us was the observation of the ease with which sadistic behavior could be elicited in individuals who were not sadistic types. The prison situation alone, Zimbardo concluded, was a sufficient condition to produce aberrant antisocial behavior. That's from the guards. From the guards. So this is pretty scary. Another fact here pointed out about that. Only 2, i.e. less than 20%, emerged as good guards who did not punish prisoners even did small favors for them. So those numbers are pretty in line with this really small percentage of people that they're just good people.
Yeah.
Right? It's only 10 to 20%.
Yeah.
Of actual good people. How does that make you feel about the human race? Dang. Not real good.
Yeah.
Not real good. All right. Another thing put out here, back to the book. Among the perpetrators, of course, orders have traditionally been most frequently cited explanation for their own behavior. So remember, orders are orders. Orders were orders, and no one in such a political climate could be expected to disobey them. They insisted. This is the guards. This is the police battalion saying, look, we were getting ordered to do this stuff. We were just following orders. We hear that all the time. Disobedience surely meant the concentration camp, if not immediate execution, possibly for their families as well. So they're saying, look, if we would ended up in the concentration camps ourselves if this had happened. Now, he points this out. Back to the book. There is a general problem with this explanation, however. Quite simply, in the past 45 years, no defense attorney or defendant in any of the hundreds of post-war trials has been able to document a single case in which refusal to obey an order to kill unarmed civilians resulted in the allegedly inevitable dire punishment. So there's no precedent for that. Now, I don't think that these guys out there in the battalion are sitting there thinking about this with a legal perspective, saying, well, actually there's no precedent for punishment being carried out on people that have been on. I think that's a stretch.
Yeah,
I think that's a stretch.
Wait, when you're talking about maybe someone contemplating
he's
refusing,
saying these guys that were saying I couldn't refuse the orders because I would get punished,
right?
And he's saying that there's no precedence,
right,
that you actually will get this severe punishment.
Right.
But how's when you're
in
someone
the
out in the
situation,
field going to know that that's a precedence? You don't. You just think, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah, you're not thinking about the time you remember the guy that you heard of getting killed.
Yeah,
you're not thinking of that.
No.
You're thinking about yourself.
And even more so, you're not thinking about the fact that you've never heard of that before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so we're talking about obedience of orders, and here we go back to the book. If obedience to orders out of fear of dire punishment is not a valid explanation, what about obedience to authority? In the more general sense used by Stanley Milgram, deference simply as a product of socialization and evolution, a deeply ingrained behavior tendency to comply with the directives of those positioned hierarchically above them, even to the point of performing repugnant actions in violation of universally accepted moral norms. So you've heard of the Milgram experiments?
No.
These are kind of like the Stanford Prison, pretty famous. And what he did was he set up these experiments where you couldn't see, these actors were behind a wall, but they were getting asked questions, and if they answered the question wrong, they would get a little electric shock.
Yeah.
That was done by the person that was being experimented on.
Uh-huh.
So, they'd say, okay, Jocko, you got this guy. His name is Echo. He's over there going to ask him a question. If he gets it wrong, you hit him with this shock. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Mm.
So when I shock you, and every question that you get wrong, I have to escalate the level of shock. So it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And your reaction is more and more horrific as these things escalate.
Right. But you're the guy, the experiment is on,
the experiment is on me. No, you're just an actor. There's no actual shock happening.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, and you're actually going through series of complaints, and I'll read this here. There was an escalating series of fake electric shocks upon a actor or victim who responded with carefully programmed voice feedback. An escalating series of complaints, cries of pain, call for help, and finally fateful silence. In the standard voice feedback experiment, 2/3 of Milgram's subjects were obedient to the point of inflicting extreme pain. Several variations on the experiment produced significantly different results. If the actor/victim was shielded so that the subject could hear and see no response, obedience was much greater. So if I couldn't hear you and I just knew that I was shocking the hell out of you, I was good with it. If the subject had both visual and voice feedback, compliance to the extreme fell to 40%. So down from 66% to 40%. If the subject had to touch the actor/victim physically by forcing his hand onto an electric plate to deliver the shocks, obedience dropped to 30%. Now this is fascinating. If a non-authority figure gave orders, obedience was nil. So if some guy was like, hey, hey, I'm Bill, I'm running the experiment. Hey, shock this guy. If the guy was no authority, they got none.
No obedience.
So that shows you, and that's from a leadership perspective, that's very important to understand.
Damn.
It's important to understand how much influence you have when you're in a leadership position. And I run into this all the time, and I ran into it in the SEAL teams, when a guy doesn't recognize the power of his rank. And he doesn't recognize that just by wearing his rank, when he says something, people are kind of like gonna do it. They want to do it.
Right.
So then, going back to the book here, if the naive subject performed a subsidiary or accessory task but did not personally inflict the electric shocks, obedience was nearly total. So that goes down to the division of labor again. If it was just me saying, okay, I asked him a question, you have to shock him again, and some other guy was shocking you, I'd go straight to 100. Straight to 100.
Dang, bro.
In contrast, if the subject was part of an actor peer group that staged carefully planned refusal to continue to follow the directions of the authority figure, the vast majority of subjects, 90%, joined their peer group and desisted as well. So that's the tipping point thing.
Yeah.
If there was if it was three of us that were conducting the experiment on you, and and I was the naive guy that doesn't know what's going on. I'm the one that they were actually doing the experiment on. Mm-hmm. And there's two actors that are in the room with me, and they're going to be like, hey, man, we shouldn't be doing this. And the other guy goes, yeah, man, that looks like it's really hurting me. We should stop this. Yeah. 90% of the time I go, yeah, you guys are right.
Yeah.
Psychology, group psychology. If the subject was given complete discretion as to the level of electric shock to administer, all but a few sadists consistently delivered a minimal shock. When not under direct surveillance of the scientist, many of the subjects cheated by giving lower shocks than prescribed, even though they were unable to confront authority and abandon the experiment. So they'd give lower shocks, but they wouldn't walk away from it. Right. They wouldn't just say, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. It's weird. So everyone's really, you know what it is? We're all just on the edge, man.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah.
Like, and we kind of need each other in that way too.
Well, it's again, this is about leadership. It's amazing how influential or how influenceable people are. They're so ready for influence. They're so ready to be told, like, hey, man, we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we saw with the podcast on the My Lai massacre. All it took was one officer saying, stop killing. And everyone, okay, stop killing.
Right.
Everyone they just need to get nudged in that direction. And by the way, they had already been nudged in the other direction, which is kill everyone. And they said, okay, cool, we'll kill everyone.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by I don't mean on the edge of like saying nothing. I mean on the fence.
Yeah, on the fence. And that's why leadership is so important, because you're walking around with people all over the world, and whatever position you're in, regardless if it's in a work environment, if it's a social environment, if it's with your friend or your peer group, you have so much power over people just by being a leader and by using that influence to work people one way or the other.
Yeah. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, it is crazy. Going back to the book, to what were the vast majority of Trapp's men responding to when they did not step out? Was it the authority as represented by either Trapp or his superiors? Were they responding to Trapp not primarily as an authority figure, but as an individual, a popular and beloved officer who they would not leave in the lurch? What about other factors? Milgram himself notes that people far more frequently invoke authority than conformity to explain their behavior, for only the former seems to absolve them of personal responsibility. And he quotes here, subjects deny conformity and embrace obedience as the explanation of their actions. So people don't like to say, everyone else is doing it, so I did it. People don't like to say that because that means I'm responsible for it. People don't like to take ownership of things. Mm-hmm. That's why we have a book called Extreme Ownership. People don't like to take ownership of things. Right? Instead, they want to say, as soon as I blame something on my boss, and this is one of the big things in extreme ownership leading up the chain of command, it's so easy to blame your boss because how can I control my boss?
I was following orders.
Boss told me to do this. That's why we failed the mission. I was told to do this. He didn't give me the right gear. That's what we hear this all the time.
Yep.
And Milgram says it too. No one wants to say, hey, you know what? I decided I was just going to do what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
That's my decision. Instead, they put that decision on the other guy, on the boss man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another exploration here, back to the book. Direct proximity to the horror of killing significantly increased the number of men who would no longer comply. On the other hand, with the division of labor and removal of the killing process to the death camps, the men felt scarcely any responsibility at all for their actions. The same thing Milgram figured out. You know, if I got someone else that's pressing the button over there that's shocking you, I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Keep rolling. Now, one thing that Milgram kind of talks about is the kind of indoctrination, or what kind of ideological justification did he give to his people. It's really just pre-existing in Milgram's experiments. These are just kind of normal people. So what about with the Nazis? And what kind of indoctrination did they get? Brainwashed, right? I've talked about this a little bit already, but back to the book. All order police battalions were to be strengthened in character and ideology. One topic for the first week, they went through like a school and education, ideological education. One topic for the first week was race as the basis of our worldview, followed by the second week, maintaining the purity of blood. So there you go. These guys are being indoctrinated, but the reason that argument doesn't really hold much weight is because of the way who the people were. And back to the book, whatever the merits of such an argument, it clearly does not hold for the predominantly middle-aged men of Reserve Police Battalion 101. They were educated and spent their formative years in the pre-1933 period. Many came from a social milieu that was relatively unreceptive to National Socialism. They knew perfectly well the moral norms of German society before the Nazis. So you can't really blame it on them being brainwashed. So here's how Browning wraps up this book. I'm going to close it out. The behavior of any human being is, of course, a very complex phenomenon, and the historian who attempts to explain it is indulging in a certain arrogance. When nearly 500 men are involved to undertake any general explanation of their collective behavior is even more hazardous. What then is one to conclude? Most of all, one comes away from the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 with a great unease. This story of ordinary men is not the story of all men. The reserve policemen faced choices, and most of them committed terrible deeds. But those who killed cannot be absolved by the notion that anyone in the same situation would have done as they did, for even among them, some refused to kill and others stopped killing. Human responsibility is ultimately an individual matter. At the same time, however, the collective behavior of Reserve Police Battalion 101 has deeply disturbing implications. There are many societies afflicted by traditions of racism and caught in the siege mentality of war or threat of war. Everywhere society conditions people to respect and defer to authority, and indeed could scarcely function otherwise. Everywhere people seek career advancement. In every modern society, the complexity of life and the resulting bureaucratization and specialization attenuate the sense of personal responsibility of those implementing official policy. Within virtually every social collective, the peer group exerts tremendous pressures on behavior and sets moral norms. If the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 could become killers under such circumstances, what group of men cannot? And there you have it. And I think those are some extremely important warnings that are laid out there. I mean, obviously, the first one, we have to be aware of traditions of racism and the threat of war, and I think those are pretty obvious and stand out pretty clearly.
Yeah.
I think the other ones are a little bit trickier, right? I think we got to watch out for the fact that we are conditioned to respect and defer to authority. I say to that, no. And I actually, when I grew up, I was a rebellious kid.
Sure.
And I listened to rebellious music, and I was a rebellious kid. I talk about that. And I think that was very beneficial for me in my military career. And I explain that all the time, that I asked questions. If I don't believe in something, I'm going to ask questions. And by the way, I want the people that work for me or with me, I want them to ask questions too. I don't want to be surrounded by yes men. And I'm not going to be a yes man. I never was. No, let me caveat that. Not that I never was. Because sometimes you got to be a yes man in order to get the inner circle where you can actually have influence. So have I played that game before? Yes, I have. Yeah, boss, that sounds like a good plan. Yeah, boss, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Oh, I trust Jocko. He agrees with me all the time. Hey, boss, you're going off the rails over here. You need to stop it. Oh, I'm going to listen to Jocko because he listens to me. So have I played that game before? Yes, of course I have. So we need to be careful that we don't submit always to authority. It's a hard thing to raise your kids with too, right?
Yeah.
Because you want your kids to submit to your authority, but you don't want them to.
Yeah.
I have to always remind myself when they rebel against me. I have to say to myself, good. Because I want them to ask questions. I want them to question authority. I don't want them to just obey.
Right, yeah.
And that freaks people out. It freaks people out when you say, I'll go and work with a company and I'll be saying like, no, I want your people. You want your people to ask questions. Right. If you want to just order them around and they're just going to obey you, first of all, I'm not going to help you there. Yeah. Because that's not a system that's functional. It'll be functional for a week. It'll be functional for 2 weeks, but eventually you'll have people that don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They don't put their effort to it. They can't make decisions on their own, and you end up with a bad team.
Yeah.
We don't want that kind of authoritarian leadership anywhere. Yeah. And certainly not anywhere. Again, does it work for 5 minutes? Does it work for a week? Yeah. Is it sometimes needed because we gotta get something done right now? Yeah. But you better follow that up with some non-authoritarian leadership. Yeah. With explaining and building relationships with people.
Yeah, that explanation thing that you guys talk about all the time, we're explaining why. Explain why I'm telling you to do this. It's important because of this, X, Y, Z. Man, and I'm speaking from a perspective of being a parent, how effective that is. You just say, this is why you're doing
and
it.
That's effective. How old is your daughter now? Yeah, it's already effective with a 4-year-old.
Yeah. And even
I gotta give you some warnings. You can't always rationalize with a 4-year-old. Sometimes they just want that cookie,
and
there's no why about it.
It was strangely with the we have a situation right now where her cousin is in, and he put in a nutshell, his diet isn't quite as
he's not on the program.
He's not on the program like how my daughter is. Not on the program, but he'll eat junk food or whatever, right? And it's kind of part of the experience. I understand where, hey, cousin's in from out of town. It's a little bit more festive and loose, and So after a while, I started realizing like, hey,
cousins show up at my house to get on the program.
It should be like that. So after a while, I was like, hey, there's too many treats going on these days. For the summer.
Echo had to drop.
I had to intervene a little bit, and so when I told my daughter, I was like, no, we're not going to do this. And I explained why. You could tell she wasn't happy with it, but she totally understood. 4 years old. And I did it in a way where it wasn't like.
Did you reference Way of the Warrior Kid a little bit?
I always do. She was wearing that shirt to school today, too, by the way.
Well, then that's an easy win right there.
Easy money, yeah. But it was I didn't scare her. I wasn't like, oh, then you're gonna be a loser or something. Something like that.
Oh, you know what my kids say to each other? Oh, you might as well just go ahead and volunteer for type 2 diabetes. Yeah, they get crazy. I know where they learned that from.
Yeah, I know exactly where they learned that from. But it was just the kind, like where...
But my older kids do it to my younger daughter.
Yeah.
You're going to get type 2 diabetes.
The peer pressure.
She's all like... She thinks she's going to get it today.
Yeah, that's messed up.
It is messed up.
Effective or ineffective, though, right? That's your thing.
True.
No, but anyway, the point being, it is effective. Especially, like how you say, too, you don't have to be a dick about it. It's not a scolding. It's not nothing like that. It's a full-on explanation so they understand.
Actually, contrary to that, it's the other end of the spectrum.
The
reason I'm talking to you is because I care about you so much that I want you to be healthy.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I'm talking to you.
You ever get, like, your parents say those exact words, I do this because I care about you. Meanwhile, they're yelling at you.
Yeah,
or
it doesn't make sense.
Spanking you.
And employers do it too. Bosses do that too.
I'm doing this for your own good.
The first thing they do is they want to jump down someone's throat. Yeah. And then everyone's reaction is the same to that.
Yeah.
No one likes it.
Nope.
No one likes it. Whereas if you take a different approach and you say, hey, Echo, you know why I'm talking to you right now? It's not because I'm mad at you.
Right.
It's because I see nothing but potential with you.
Yeah.
That's what I see. And when I see that you're not making many videos, it's not because I'm thinking to myself, oh, I want more videos. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm thinking is because I actually see how much potential you have, and you could really do some powerful stuff and have some huge influence.
Dang.
But
you're so right, Jocko. You're so right.
As opposed to you better make more videos, or else I'm gonna have my kid do it.
Will you be lazy, bro?
Yeah, exactly. No, then you'd be like, fine, every kid do. They won't be as good as mine. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's not what that's not the game we're playing here.
Yeah.
I do see a lot of potential in you, and I think you could make more videos.
Oh, thank you so much.
So you got to watch out for obeying authority. You got to question authority all the time, and then he talks about people seeking career advancement. That's another big one. Mm. And that's another big one I say no to, right? There's such a much better way to get career advancement, and that is by doing a good job.
Yeah.
That's how you get career advancement. Instead of seeking career advancement, seek to do a good job, seek to make a difference, seek to do what is right. The career is going to come in one form or the other. Now, might you get passed up? Might some other guy that tooted his own horn and took the credit, might that happen? Yes, it might happen. You might get delayed, but that guy's going to continue to build that reputation. And the bosses missed it on the first round of advancements, so he got it. Yeah. Maybe he even gets the second round. By the third round, they're looking at him going, this guy's a self-serving loser. We need to get him off the team. And by the way, we realize that the guy that's been behind all this work is Echo over there. So we're going to promote him now. Now you're going to win. Now you've got a really solid reputation. So you can't. But the idea of seeking career advancement, you see that in the military all the time. There's people that are just trying to get advanced. Don't care whose back they're stepping on. Yeah. And I'm telling you, I saw some of those guys get advanced in my community. They advanced up through the ranks. They were stepping on people's backs to get there. Their reputation eventually was so bad that it didn't get them propel. They didn't propel as far as they wanted to. Yeah. The great guys, the guys that were really truly just trying to do the best for the community, those guys got promoted and they would make it, the furthest. Yeah. Because their reputation was so solid. Yeah. And everyone knew that these guys were doing the right things for the right reason, not so they could get promoted, but they ended up getting promoted.
Yeah. Yeah, promotion is more of like a eventuality more
it's
than
eventuality.
Like
it's just like jiu-jitsu. If you're just trying to get your belt, and that's what you're trying to prove, that's not going to work out well for you.
Getting mad when the other guy gets promoted.
You might get your blue belt before some other white belt because you're showing off all the time. Yeah. But eventually, you're showing off all the time.
Yeah.
And the coach goes, "Hey man, why don't you help everyone?"
Yeah.
Or the coach goes, "Hey, I see you're tapping a lot of people out that are the same level as you all the time, but you're not going with anyone that's harder than you because you want to prove to me that you're tapping everyone out." Wrong move.
You know what you might see sometimes? Is how when you come up through the jiu-jitsu ranks, you just find a certain move or handful of moves, and those moves you get better at them quicker than
still
others.
There.
Yeah, I think we all kind of are in one way or another. And so this is what, if you're pursuing the belt, this is what you do when the instructor's around. You only do your good moves.
Yeah, because you want to look good.
Yeah, you want to look good. That's all you do. you know, and you do. And when you say it'll show itself later, you know, so what can happen is you get your blue belt, you get your purple belt because like you show off to your instructors or whatever, and in the tournaments too.
I just realized something about myself. I just had a rude awakening.
But what'll happen is later on, you ever get so this might have been a long time for you, but maybe not. So I'm training with I went to class. Jeff Glover's teaching the class, and Jeff Glover's like, "Hey, let's do this," and he does some crazy kind of advanced move.
Yep.
But it takes like if you're an advanced person, you know how to move your body in jiu-jitsu, kind of in an advanced way. You can do the move, even though you've never done the move before. Right. You know that kind of move. So it was that kind of move. It was one where you gotta like go between the guy's legs, lift up into like heel hook or whatever leg lock you choose. So I don't do that move at all, and I've been training. I've been in this game for a long time. So I go and I do it, and I don't want to say I was surprised, but like I could do it. I could totally. But Jeff was like, "Whoa," kind of like, "Dang," because I'm a bigger guy too, you know. And that made me think of this kind of thing where some guys, they can be a black belt, and they'll say, "Hey, show this move real quick," and it'll be a black belt, and they can't do it because they've avoided that. And not to say that this is the case all the time. I'm just saying that's like an example of how you can avoid getting better and only show off like XYZ to get you to that kind of next specific level.
Yeah,
I don't know. Blue belt or whatever.
This is a similar thing, maybe, but I realized when you were talking about this, what I'll do is both with Dean and with Jeff. If I'm doing something that they showed me, I'll call them out like a little kid. I'll be like, Jeffy, check this out. Oh, here it is. Pet. Yeah, I'd be like, oh, you like that one? Yeah. Hit that. And you know what else? I do it with Dean with my kids. When my kids are training, and I'll say, "Hey, Dean, check. Oh, look at that. He's gonna get it." You know what I mean? Right, I'm kind of like all happy.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just happy that I'm learning or that they're learning.
Yeah, that's different.
But it's pretty cool when you can pull off what you just learned, right?
Yeah,
that's cool, and it's cool for a teacher. I'm stoked when somebody does something that I showed them.
Big time. So I guess the difference is, if in fact this is even the difference, is why did you do that? It's not to get your kid promoted.
Yeah,
you know,
and it's not even to get me promoted because I can't get promoted.
Yeah, you kind of can't get promoted right now. Yeah.
So I guess it's sort of like maybe the negative aspect would be like I'm looking for some credit for pulling off the move, the little guy move,
totally
or the different move or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I think it's pretty bad.
I think
it's pretty lame.
I think it's fun.
I think I'm pretty lame for that. Yeah, so watch out for that. Watch out for the career advancement. Don't let that be the focus of your life, man. It's not going to make you. It's not going to get you what you want. Now, again, are there instances where you play the game so that you can move up, so that you can have more control? Yes, I did that. Hey, look, I went from enlisted to officer. That's the ultimate in, hey, I'm going to play the game. I'm going to get more. I want to be in charge of more stuff. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to skip all these ranks. I'm going to become an officer. I did that.
Yeah.
I played that game. I was about my career. But I was about my career so I could make, 15 guys in a SEAL platoon happy.
Yeah.
Because I was happy when I had a good leader in my SEAL platoon. The other one he talks about here is this bureaucratization and specialization, attenuating the sense of personal responsibility. This is another thing that we have to be careful of. Just because you're part of a system doesn't mean you should just, blame the system when something goes wrong. If you're working somewhere and something isn't going, hey, that's the way we do it. Hey, that's the way the system works. Hey, we can't change that. I never accepted that as an answer. And I'll tell you what, when you come up against that, the way you fight it when you come up against it is you build a relationship. Yeah. Right? So, you ever have you're trying to deal with some customer service or something, and you're getting sorry, we can't help you.
Yeah.
And you go down to the store and you're like, hey, what's going on? Hey, Bill. Hey, I'm Jocko, man. I called you earlier. I got to get this thing resolved. Here's what's going on. Yeah. You don't go down there and say, you need to take care of this. No, you say, hey, Bill, what's going on? Hey, I'm Jocko. Yeah, man, I really like the piece of gear, but man, it worked good. there was a couple issues I had with him. I'm trying to get them resolved because, my daughter's birthday's in 2 weeks and I need, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You form a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Let's get the bureaucratic. Don't let them stay in their big bureaucratic system.
Yeah.
We don't want to let that happen because then the bureaucratic machine, then they're not the ones that are offending you. It's the machine. They can't control the machine. It's not their machine. Yeah. They're just part of the machine.
Bro, where this concept fundamentally is the same as this. When you're in traffic, and you're trying to get over.
Kind of. Oh, yeah.
And you want to get in the lane, but, from the other guy's perspective or the other car's perspective, hey, this car is trying to cut me off. This car. And this car's going to get in my way, right? But you get whoever you're riding with, all you got to get them roll down the window, make eye contact with the person and be like, hey, just wave at them or something. Look, I'm a person. You're a person.
Yeah.
We're not standing in line. We're all going the same spot. That's
machines.
What you feel.
Yeah. We're not machines.
You just give them that hint of a personal element. I'll let you right in. They'll wave you in. You wave back. You guys are friends. And before, keep in mind, 2 seconds before that, you were pissed.
Yeah.
You're like, this guy's about to get in front of me. And there's no reason to be mad about that, by the way. It's not like you're standing in line to get there. Yeah.
He's got to be somewhere, too.
You're going in the same direction.
In the rush.
Yeah.
But you got to put it on your deal.
Same thing. Step out of the machine, man. Yeah. The machine of trust. Step out. Hey, I'm a person. You're a person.
Yes. Make the personal relationships up and down the chain of command throughout your company. Don't let the finance department, right?
Yeah, the department, the policies.
The finance department shut us down on this thing.
Yeah.
Well, give me the name. Who did that? I'm going to walk down there and see him.
Yeah. See what up.
The marketing department won't give us any more. Okay, cool. Let's find out who that is. No, it's not a bureaucratic. It's not a marketing department.
No, it's
that's
Bill.
A machine. No, it's Bill. Bill's in there.
100%.
And when Bill knows what you're trying to do and knows that you are trying to make something happen, you make that connection. Now we're good to go. Bill's going to take care of you. No reason to freak out. The other thing, finally, here is this idea of this peer group, this social collective peer pressure. We all know it exists, and that's fine, but make it good. Right? Peer pressure is powerful. It's powerful, and the good thing is you get to control it in both directions. You need to recognize it when it's happening to you in a negative way, and then you need to use it in a positive way to help people do good things. Use peer pressure. Peer pressure is legit for making people do positive things.
Big time.
What you don't want to do is use peer pressure to make people do negative things. And there's a lot of that in the world. And I'll tell you why. There's a certain part of people that don't like to see other people succeed.
Yeah.
So they go, man, just come out tonight, dude. But dude, I got to work in the morning. Dude, just come out.
Yeah.
We're just going to get a couple drinks.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Let's do a shot.
You're always on that diet.
Yeah. The people
hey, loosen up. Lighten up.
Yeah, they want to see. There's a certain part of people that want to see everyone else fail.
Yeah.
And if you've got to pay attention to that in yourself.
Yes.
You got to pay attention to that in your own self. Because if you don't, you won't realize it.
Yeah. Huh?
But you actually, I've seen people give other people bad advice because they're jealous. They're jealous. Certain programs. I seen a friend of mine was going for a certain program in the military. Yeah. And he came to me, he said, man, I was going to try this program, but a couple guys are telling me I shouldn't. And I said, bro, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. They are jealous. They are jealous. They don't want you to do this program because it's going to make you more successful. Yeah. Go do the program. Huh. And he said, okay. And he did it.
Jocko peer pressure.
Yeah. I want to give peer pressure of goodness, not of badness. True. And the thing is, I mean, I guess you could look at peer pressure in a way is it's leadership. Whether you're standing up to it, or whether you're spreading the positive peer pressure, that's leadership. And that's what we're here to do, man. Yeah. We're here to do. We're here to lead. And when you use that in a positive way, you can prevent this kind of sick, sadistic, horrible, horrific events like this, like we read about today, from happening. I mean, it's crazy that this occurred. Yeah. And it's crazy that it, even throughout the book, and it's just referring to the Jews, right? It's just referring to the Jews. The Jews lined up, the Jews laid down, the Jews got shot in the back of the neck. The Jews. let's remember that every single one of those Jews was a name, was a person,
right.
was Bill, was, we do the same thing. We're putting them in a sort of big chunk of machinery.
Yeah.
That they're part of the product of what's happening over here. Right. And yeah, don't do it on either side.
Yeah. Or
don't
in traffic.
Don't let it happen on either side. Don't let it happen in traffic. Don't let it happen in your life.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
That's what leadership is about. It really is. And leadership, the thing about leadership is happening at all times. The minute you are interacting with another person, leadership is taking place. You're either being led, which is fine, or you're leading, which is fine. As long as you're going in the right direction. But if you constantly think, and you're leading yourself, by the way, of course, you're leading yourself. You're constantly leading yourself. But the minute you meet with someone else, there's a leadership situation happening. You're either leading that person or you're being led. And that's okay. It's okay to be led as long as you're being led in the right direction. Right. If you start seeing yourself being led in the wrong direction and you go with it, you're at fault.
Yeah.
You're at fault. You can't blame that person. You went along with it. Yeah. You're culpable for your actions. So, again, I know it's a brutal topic to cover, and I'm sure we'll be back at it again at some point. But let's not forget that this happened, and that if we're not careful, it can happen again.
Yeah. And you get little things like in way lower levels where, that stuff happens all the time. Like little riots break out,
Yeah.
Normal people destroying cars because that's kind of what everyone's doing, Until one guy's like, hey, stop, we got to stop. You're like, okay, we stop.
Yeah.
The peer pressure thing, that's why you get a workout buddy, or you join. That's why CrossFit in a big way is like really, it's a good group thing because everyone's like, hell yeah, like they cheer you on. You can't, in a way, you look forward to just linking up with the group, and the group's talking about like, doing good stuff and working out.
And you're right. And as a matter of fact, there's a whole new phenomenon in the fitness world, which is basically all stems from CrossFit, and they call it just group exercise, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we got group exercise classes.
Group X.
Yeah, group exercise classes because, hey, I want to work out with other people. I want to have, Echo call me up and be like, hey, you going to make it to class tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm kind of feeling lazy. Come on, bro.
Yeah, I'm going.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't want to be weak.
Yeah.
You're pressuring me to be strong. That's good.
Yep. True story.
So use that in a positive way.
Yeah. You ever been, well, you probably have. Come on, we can be honest here. You know the kind where you're like, okay, I'm going to link up with whoever to go train or to go work out or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dang, when the time comes, you're like, dang, I don't really feel like it. In the back of my mind, I hope that they call and cancel. I hope. And then they call, they don't cancel. They call to confirm. Mm-hmm. And you go. You didn't want to go, you go. At the end of the workout, you're like, dang, I almost didn't make it today. Good thing, That's common, man. That happens to me all the time.
And I'll tell you, people ask me about this a lot. You got to start to memorize that good feeling that comes after a good workout.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to force yourself through it in anticipation.
Such a good way to put it. Yeah. So to memorize the feeling.
Memorize the feeling of like, I memorize two feelings. One is I memorize how good it feels when you're done.
Yeah.
And two, I memorize how bad it feels when you're weak and you say no.
Yeah.
So that's a horrible, I hate that feeling. I hate that feeling of like I didn't do it.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like junk. Junk.
Straight up junk.
I was just on the road and it was like, don't do it. I just feel like, man, I squeezed in a couple workouts at night, pretty weak workouts, but just to get them done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to move.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do is be sedentary. Yeah. And I was moving during the day because we were in the water and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, but you got to get them done.
Yeah.
So memorize the feelings. There's nothing worse than the feeling of I slept in.
Well,
I guess there are worse feelings. For you, that's probably the wrong statement.
Good feeling.
I don't like the feeling of I slept in and now I'm behind the power curve.
Yeah, that's the feeling.
I don't like that feeling at all.
Yeah, like you
memorize that feeling.
Yeah.
And then run from it. Speaking of memorize, are you going to go over everything that everyone has memorized you saying at this point when you talk about how they can support the podcast?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to go I'm going to go in at a different angle. I'm going to say, speaking of peer pressure, because this is really what it is. This is a group. You peer pressure me, you peer pressure everyone else who listens. We collectively peer pressure each other. And this is what we're doing. We're working out. There's no reason not to work out today. Nowadays. Not, I mean, this day, today.
Yeah,
today could be your rest day.
But you should work out today, too.
You should have, yes.
Yeah.
You should. Later, even, if you haven't already. Anyway, this is what we're doing. We're working out.
Yes.
If we have weight to lose, we know if we're overweight. We do. Even if we're like 5 pounds overweight. Think of like your ideal weight. Like, think of that. If you're not
750 pounds. That's my ideal weight.
Go.
When you roll with someone that's massive,
yeah,
and you think, I wish I was this massive. I wish I was, 450 pounds, because then you would just smash everyone.
Yeah, but that might get in the way in other aspects of life. Like if you're 450 pounds, that would mean what? How tall? Like what? 6'8"?
No, I would want to be like 8'9".
Yeah, okay. So surfing is going to be an issue for you.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so kind of say goodbye to your current knowledge or your current schema of surfing.
Okay.
Say goodbye to that.
Good point.
That's just one thing, man.
Good point.
There's other things. So you're just thinking jiu-jitsu wise. I understand.
Jiu-jitsu and just MMA. Well, you'd be out of the weight classes though.
Yeah, yeah. So you'd have to fight in these weird offshoots, whatever. I'm just saying. Look at the big picture.
I'll just be what I am.
Actually, you know what, bro? 750. Bro, do you, bro? If you want to be that big, that's your ideal weight. You go with that. Don't listen
750 pounds.
Yeah,
8'10".
And that's really the point. The point is, you know your ideal weight. You do, not me. You know, I don't have an ideal weight for you. Maybe I do, but it serves my interest.
You want me to weigh 122 pounds.
Yes, exactly right. And be less mentally strong. But for everyone else, we all know how much we want to weigh, or whatever. So this is what we're doing: peer pressure. We're going to do that. We're going to pursue that. We're working out. We are getting control of our ego, temper, and other various weaknesses. Also, to facilitate that, we're taking krill oil. If our joints are sore, that's what we're doing. We're problem solving. Ultimately, it's just one big problem solving thing. So look, joints are sore, krill oil. Boom, joints not sore anymore. Move to the next thing. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, krill oil from Onnit. You want 10% off the krill oil. Save money. Financial discipline equals financial freedom. Boom. We'll kind of put that right in the whole equation. Go to onnit.com/Jocko, 10% off. And support the podcast. We're all on this thing together kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
Other stuff on Onnit. I took some new mood today.
Interesting.
I'm not necessarily in a new mood. I think I'm in the same mood, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more just, balancing out your whole stuff.
Yeah.
I just took it because it was there, and
that's the kind of thing that I won't take.
You don't want to be balanced,
no,
huh? You want to be unbalanced.
I want current mood.
Yeah, I'm current mood.
What if you're feeling angry? Good. Then I'm good to go.
I'm fairly certain it's for brain health, and I think the new mood part of it is more of like a kind of a happenstance kind of cool thing, like, Anyway.
Maybe.
I took some of that. I have some of that. I'm down for that. There's a bunch of other stuff. Performance stuff, So if you're like, hey, I'm getting after it, I want performance supplementation, that's what we're doing too. We're doing all this stuff as a group. So is Jocko, our current leader.
I think this is a group without a leader.
Until someone tells him to stop, then we're all stopping. Anyway, also, good way to support. And this is to support yourself and support the group, really, because, so this book, all these books, we read these books. Sure, we listen to Jocko go over it, and it's dope, but, you want to get the book. If you want to get the book and read the whole thing.
I'm reading less than 10% of the books.
Yeah.
5%.
It's like a book report.
Although I might have gone a little bit crazy with Sydney Cherry last week.
Yeah.
I wanted to read. I just want to do it just full on audiobook. Just start and I'll stop 7 hours later. Only at 3.5.
Yeah, that's it. So
got some good lessons though.
Yeah, they're all good lessons.
How many people see, podcasts 3 hours and 27 minutes and go, come on, Jocko.
Come on, yeah.
And how many people? No, actually, you know what they say? Come on, Echo. You talked about support for 2 hours and 27 minutes. Come on.
Brad, it's not my fault. That's the machine. I just did a small little
Guilty.
part. You know?
Guilty.
Anyway, if you want the books or one or whatever, our website, JockoPodcast.com, there's a section, a page, if you will. Menu on the top says books from podcast. Boom, click on that. Click through there. Take you to Amazon. Purchase the book. That's a good way to support. And you get the book. Boom. Also, if you're going to do any other shopping on there, hey, feel free. That's a good way to support in a solid way. And that's what we're all doing. Straight up.
See, so now you're throwing this real heavy peer pressure on everyone.
Yeah, but this is good peer pressure. You said good peer pressure is good.
Well, that is good because we're not. You're just helping the podcast. It doesn't cost you anything.
Exactly right. Boom. And that's what we're doing. What we're doing is subscribing. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, continue talking.
All right, there you go. I will. And so subscribe to the podcast. That's what we're all doing. I'm subscribed to the podcast that I'm on.
Yeah, well, obviously.
So we're all going to do it. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Also on YouTube, subscribe to that one. That's a good one.
That's where you make all those videos.
All the videos.
You told me you're doing 3 videos a week now.
Yeah, man.
That's so far I have not seen that.
Nah, 3 a week.
Is this in the future?
Podcast video format. That
You're
counts.
Counting?
Yes, I'm counting. It counts.
So you're doing 1 podcast video and
then 2 excerpts.
2 excerpts.
Minimum is what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's kind of the
So we should have a lot of excerpts up there.
Yeah, and they grow every week. So the benefit to those.
By the way, you need to make your excerpts shorter.
Why?
Because they're too long. A 12-minute excerpt's not even an excerpt. That's just another podcast. That's the same. That goes back to the same problem.
It's essentially an alternate version. You know what you need to do?
Edit them.
Yeah.
Get the meat.
Dang, that's a good.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Amazing, isn't it? Should just be like, boom. Someone should be able to listen to it in 30 seconds and be like, oh, I got the deal here.
Yeah. So
the problem is with you is you enjoy the arc of the conversation.
Yeah, see,
if people want to hear the arc of the conversation, they just listen to the whole podcast.
Maybe I've been hanging around with you too long, because last week the way you were fucking, you couldn't edit out just that whole 45 minutes of whatever. Same thing. You get into it.
Yeah.
So part of that is a joke, but part of it is a series. So you know how I'm listening to your whole little segment. And I'm going to cut it, right? I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to cut it right here. And then your little follow-up comment is cool. And then maybe I say something, which is like, whatever. I can cut myself out easily. But then your follow-up to me is kind of cool. I'm like, hey, that's important too. I should leave that part. And so it just turns into this thing.
Next 12-minute excerpts.
Sometimes. Whatever. That only happens one time.
Those are Jocko chicken, McHalf chicken nuggets. Jocko McChicken breasts with thigh and leg.
Yeah. They're not McNuggets anymore, no. Actually, they are, but, that's an exception. Sometimes they're 12 minutes. Hey, man, they're 12 minutes
The
sometimes.
other thing we could do is I could actually reshoot, re-record just the pertinent parts if you can't edit it out without, feeling bad.
That's a step backwards, I think.
I'm just making sure.
It's repetitive, Anyway, that's a good way to support. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Boom. Shareable stuff on there in the event of the excerpts not being 12 minutes, in the event of them being 3 minutes or so. You can share them. More shareable.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I saw it was right after I posted it, and then I think he was like, I don't know, I think Brady maybe, he shares it, and then I watched it. So that's how shareable it is. I just posted it, he shared it, and I watched it.
You did it, cut it, edited it.
Yeah.
Posted it, and then got shared back to you, and you still watched it.
Yeah, well, technically it wasn't shared to me directly. Actually, technically it was.
You're admiring your own work. No. That's such a good excerpt.
No. Yes. So good how I cut the beginning and the end of that. Anyway.
I pressed stop and start. Wow.
Anyway, subscribe to YouTube. That's the point. That's what we're doing. Also, Jocko has a store. It's called JockoStore. JockoStore.com. So, what's on here is clothing items, if you will. New shirt out. Okay, so here's the thing. This is what we're doing. We're wearing Jocko Podcast shirts. That's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing.
Peer pressure is thick today,
Bruh,
bro.
I'm telling you, it's good peer pressure. Look, see this shirt Jocko's wearing right now.
Even
See
this has
shirt?
become a Jocko podcast shirt because we now manufacture a Victory MMA and Fitness t-shirts to stay old school.
It's the Jocko uniform.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That shirt's on JockoStore.com. This shirt that I'm currently wearing, JockoStore.com. In fact, all the shirts are on JockoStore.com.
A guy at the muster had this t-shirt on in the morning
respect.
PT. And at first I was like, just like, oh man, somebody's...
Victory guy.
And then I was like, oh, even cooler. He's not a Victory guy, but he's representing.
Representing, That's all. That's what we're doing. Representing big time. And if you... I'm not saying buy a shirt. I never say buy a shirt. I'm saying JockoStore.com. Check it out. If you like one or more of the items on there, including but not limited to shirts, get something. There's also rash guards, hoodies. Kind of, I got to replenish those, I understand. But some rash guards on there. And
the next hoodies are going to be thick and heavy, Alaskan style.
Okay.
Minnesota style.
You know what I was thinking of?
Montana style. Not
Hawaii style.
Kauai style.
Dang. Okay.
Kauai, not Kauai style.
Or we could have both. Because look, you can't exclude the kama aina. You know what kama aina means? It means
the people.
Technically, when you think about it, kama aina means land. So people of the land.
Yeah. I got a pretty good guess right there, didn't I?
There you go.
Kama aina.
So anyway, you can't neglect those folks.
Okay.
They're cool
Well,
folks.
we need to make a Hawaii style one and a northerner style one.
Yeah, the two sides of the spectrum.
Thick.
Everybody wants to represent. Or that's what we're all doing, representing. Anyway, some rash guards on there. Like I said, what I was going to say is, Jocko has a shirt. And we mentioned it before. Jocko has a shirt. Now, well, technically, he designed a shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Varying levels of acceptance on my end.
Yeah, it's the Echo shirt. Some people call it the dang shirt, but it's the Echo shirt. There's some layers there. You might be able to figure them out.
Technically, there's more layers on this shirt than any other shirt.
This
really?
might be the most layered shirt. And the fact that I made it is a layer in its own right.
It is, I think. But my evaluation is it's interesting. It was actually impressive. The design is impressive. Like the layers and stuff. Anyway, designed exclusively by Jocko.
So now I'm a fashion designer too.
Yes, correct.
Artist, fashion designer.
Yep.
Who would have thunk? I'm neither.
Technically, you're both.
No, I'm not.
Technically.
I'm not either.
Anyway, that one's on there right now. Right this very moment. That one's on there if you want to check it out. I'm not saying to buy it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying check it out.
I think this shirt's going to be popular with your head on it. By the way, it has Echo's head on it because there's a layer in
you got to see it.
Yeah, you got to see it.
Yeah.
No, what I'm saying is somebody that like doesn't want to just be forthcoming. Like for instance, a lot of the shirts that we have that have layers to them, you don't know exactly what, like Know the Darkness, right? No one knows what the hell that has to do with.
Yeah.
The Jocko podcast shirt, the one that says Jocko podcast on it, okay, we know there's some layers there, but it's also pretty forthcoming what it means.
Yeah.
The shirt that I made for you with your head on it, no one's gonna have any idea what that is. It's so people automatically have some good layers there just by wearing that.
Right.
It's not no one's gonna have any idea what this is. Why is that human's head on your chest?
You're saying external people.
Yes.
Like people who aren't in the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
People in the game, they're going to get the whole thing and they're going to be like, holy God, Jocko is
It's like if you listen to a band and you have a shirt that doesn't say the band name on it, but it's got the album cover.
Yeah.
And people know. People that know. People that listen know. Right?
They know.
If they listen, they know. Same thing with this shirt. If they don't listen, they're not going to know.
Yeah.
If they listen, you're going to get cred.
Street
cred. Right.
But yeah, that's a good one. Anyway, JockoStore.com. That's a good one. That's what we're doing. Also, what we're doing straight up is in the moments of weakness that we may or may not have. Some of us have them more than others. But what we do is we turn to psychological warfare. If you don't know what that is, this is what it is. Psychological warfare is an album with tracks. Dig it. And these tracks, what they do is they give you a spot with any weakness or weak moments you have. So if you're waking up early every single day and that one day comes or whatever that you're like, dang, that alarm, or that my bed is extra comfy, maybe I'll sleep in. You don't want to have slept in, but that's how you feel at that moment of weakness. Play one of the tracks. Wake up and get after it. I don't use that particular track. I use the workout one, so it's different. But it'll help you through. It'll give you that spot. Just like when and I said this before, and this makes perfect sense. This is what we're doing. Hey, when we jump onto the bench and we take on lofty challenges on the bench press, we're going to grab a guy to spot us. Not to say he's going to touch the bar, not to say any of that, but we have a lofty challenge. So we got the spot to ensure our success. So to me, if you're not doing anything, if you're not pursuing anything, then this isn't for you. You just got to get up and at whatever time you get up and go to whatever you do, come home, do your thing, which is cool. That's not what we're doing though. So I say, while we do our big things, we're going to get our spot. It's called psychological warfare. I'm not even saying to use it. I'm saying, but if you need it, you got it to ensure your success.
It's okay. That's good. Thank you. Appreciate that one.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, also, you can get Jocko white tea on Amazon. Get some if you want some. Also, originmain.com. If you're getting into jiu-jitsu or if you're into jiu-jitsu already and you need a gi or a rash guard, I recommend you go to originmain.com. It's my brother Pete Roberts up there in Maine where they make everything, which is awesome. They weave the fabric, sew it, stitch it, embroider it, send it out. Gis, rash guards, shorts, made in America. And yes, we are getting in league with Origin Maine. So there's a little bit of a perfect storm kind of brewing. Got somebody that makes something in America, something that I like.
In your neck of the woods too, by the way.
In my neck of the woods. So we're getting on the warpath with Origin Maine, and we're going to get after it. So check them out. Then Way the Warrior Kid. Make a kid's life better. Get him or her this book so they can get better, faster, stronger. And before you give it to them, little advice, read it yourself. Uncle Jake has something for all of us. That's for sure. Also, Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. I brought like a rough copy. I forget there's some name that they call this.
Rough copy.
This will be my third book I published. I still don't understand the publishing. Like, they have certain words and stuff. They use terms.
Sure.
And
jargon.
Say, we're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And I say, what does that mean? But this is the book. This is the book inside the cover. So a couple things. Does this have a flashy cover that's going to attract, people to buy it? No, it doesn't. It's got an all black cover, flat. That's what it's got. Yep. Is it got some, some interesting fluff in there for you to feel good about yourself? No, that stuff's not in there either. Does it have these incredible life hacks that are going to teach you how to rise and fulfill your dreams through simple things that you can do? No, those aren't in there either. Mm. It's called the Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. It's about discipline, and if you follow it, you're going to find freedom. Pretty simple. There you go. If you're on YouTube, there's the book right there. Oh, what does it look like? Hard to see against the black background because it's black.
Yeah. It's not so you can see the cover. That's not what the book's for.
No. Although the cover does kind of.
You can see it.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty dope, to be honest.
That's that. You can order. That comes out October 17th. The assumption is you might want to order it now so you get a copy when it first comes out. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, people will have discipline before you. And that's not going to work out good for you. Extreme ownership, of course, you have it. By the way, you have it. That's good, but get it for your team because that'll make your life easier. If you want to do that, we also have Echelon Front Consulting, me, Leif Babin, JP Donnell, Dave Burke. Get your team aligned so your leadership can crush your enemies. And by the way, don't try and book us through a speaker's agent if you know what that is. If you know what that is, don't do it. Don't look online and find our literary agent and try and book. Don't do that. We have a company. It's called Echelon Front. Book through the company, info@echelonfront.com. Email that. That's how you get us to come and work with your company. The muster, we just got done with one. The next one is September 14th and 15th in San Diego. It is going to sell out. This is factual. It is going to sell out. It is factual. It is going to sell out because all three of the first ones have sold out. This one's going to sell out too. Register. Go to extremeownership.com if you want to come to it. If you don't want to come, stay at home. That's fine too.
Cool.
Whatever. Also, if you train jiu-jitsu or if you don't train and you want to start training, speaking of Origin, Maine, we're doing the Origin Immersion Jiu-Jitsu camp up in Maine. Echo and I are going to be there training and cruising super hard. We'll be there the last day of the first session and the first day of the second session. The sessions are August 20 through 23rd for the first session and 24th through the 27th for the second session. Come on up. We're going to be there if you want to train some jiu-jitsu. It's going to be a good time. And what I like about it is at the muster is a tight schedule. From 4 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, we're moving. Mm-hmm. This thing, we're going to do what? 5 hours, 6 hours of jiu-jitsu a day?
Sure.
And then the rest of the time, what are we going to do with the other 18 hours a day?
Yeah. You're saying total, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at lunch, 2 hours in the afternoon. Yeah. I mean, maybe not training the whole time, but learning new moves. Jiu-jitsu, yes, doing jiu-jitsu, showing, like, hey, can you go over this with me? Hey, I got a question for you. Hey, Echo, can you teach me that mount escape that you got? Like, whatever. You know, those things we're going to do. We're going to do that.
Yeah.
But, so that's 6 hours. And then we sleep for 4 hours, so that's 10 hours. That's 14 hours. This is 14 hours going to be just walking around in circles going BTF. No, that's what we're going to do is we're going to hang out. So if you want to come, train some jiu-jitsu, hang out, come to that camp up in Maine. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have a good time up there. And until then, we'll be rolling in another place. Victory MMA, yes. Also, we'll be rolling on the interwebs. The Twitter, the Instagram, and that Facey Butchie boy. Echo is at Echo Charles, and I am at Jocko Willink. And finally, thanks to everyone for listening to this podcast, which is brought to you by our military, who are out there holding the line against evil worldwide. It's also brought to you by police, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, and other first responders who make this country safe here on the home front so we can enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thanks to all of you in uniform for what you do, and the rest of you that are out there leading wherever you are and whatever you do, leading yourself and the people around you in the right direction. Forward, toward the goal, toward the light, toward a better place, setting the example and getting after it. So until next time, this is Echo and Jocko. Out.